Get started and get done. So, I would like to welcome all members of the public, all of our faculty, staff, and administrators from the Mill River Schools, my fellow board members. Adrian is not with us tonight. I, as vice chair, am serving to chair this in her absence. This is a public meeting, as it should be. It's not a meeting of the public. So I will be limiting public comment to agenda item 3, and I'll say more about that when we get to that. Dave, would you please do this?
Yeah. Can we please stand for the pledge? I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Because we're all wearing masks, I'm going to have people vote by raising their masks because I can't see your mouth. Right. So, approval of the agenda.
I move to amend the agenda.
We need to have a motion before we can discuss it.
I'm supposed to move right now.
Really? Okay.
I move to amend the agenda with exceed to include Star 360 scores and ad hoc committee that I talked about last week, informing a ad hoc committee to look into why students have left the district and how many have left the district. And Adrian was supposed to put it on the agenda. It's not in.
Our Star 360 scores, is that something they will discuss?
we're doing a big district goals presentation in
That's part of
July.
that.
Included in there.
I'd like to make a motion to table agenda item number 7, which is board district goals presentation, until the next board meeting on October 6th, after our board retreat on 9/25.
So in order to do that, we need a second. In order to bring that for discussion, that we need a second. Okay.
May I ask for some clarification of, David, why did you choose to put the board in today?
Sure, thanks. So the history, as I understand it, is we have been targeting the board retreat and the time when our goal presentation would occur. But as a board, you know, the retreat date has been an elusive and moving target for quite some time. Following the last board meeting, when there was a request from Bruce related to wanting to have the board present that information, I made an inquiry of the chair, who assists with building the agenda. Can we do the board goal presentation at this meeting for two purposes? One, the upcoming board retreat on the 25th. My team that's here presenting tonight will not be available for that, so there's no ability for us to present that to you on the 25th. I realize that's not what Glenn asked for, but the option on the 25th is not there. So it's the wish of the administration that we can present to you this evening. That way you have all that information, it's all public, and you've had an opportunity to digest it. As a board, you have had this information in hand for about a month at this point in time, but that way it can be digested going into your retreat, and you can turn the conversation to thinking about where do we go from there. So that's the logic on this evening.
Okay, so this is not what our goals are, but it's to help us inform for the retreat.
This is a status update on our goals
Okay.
and to inform what you do next.
But those goals could change in our retreat.
Yes. I would say that's something I would agree to. They can change.
Well, my concern was when I look at the board agenda item, it says discussion and action. And I don't mind the discussion. I'm okay with the discussion. But I don't want us sitting here accepting board goals, that, and I know we've had it for a month, we've had it for a long time, and I agree, but I don't want us to just say, okay, we're gonna accept it. I think, in my opinion, we need to do a lot of discussion around the board goals. And that takes time, and which was why it was placed at the board retreat. If I can be assured that there will be no action taken, then I will withdraw my motion.
On number 7 here, I don't see action as part of that. I mean, maybe
I
that's
do.
a previous, the agenda got amended, but right here, number 7, it only says discussion.
That's correct.
I believe that's part of the amended.
So would you like to withdraw that motion?
It's just a discussion.
It's only discussion.
And it is written in the one that got sent out.
Okay.
There's no action.
Okay.
So,
So, does the person who seconded it have to withdraw their second, or do I withdraw my motion?
You do the
Robert's
motion, the
rules.
second automatically goes away.
Okay,
yep, you can.
so I will withdraw my motion.
Okay, thank you. Bruce, I just want to clarify the amendment to the agenda. Was that a report from that ad hoc committee? Is that about forming?
It's about forming the committee.
It's about forming the committee. All right,
I
so,
think the impression that there was committee members formed in the last meeting.
That was different. That was different. It was for
Display.
the display outside.
so how about we stick that after, committee reports? Before, other legal business. That'll be any number 12. So, is there a motion to approve the agenda with that amendment?
I move that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Against? Against the amended?
Oh, yeah.
Against.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I will try to speak more clearly with my mask on. Against. And anyone abstaining? Thank you. So, moving on. So, the next section is public input. Do I have a list?
Gary, can you have the input, public input list off the table?
And while that's coming, I have a little, I just have, so ahead of the public comment, I would like to say to everyone present that we really appreciate your attendance. I would also like to remind you, if you have a concern about an issue, there are also some alternate ways to address them. That is not to shut you down right now, but it's just to make sure everyone's aware. A concern about a school-specific issue should be addressed initially to a teacher or the coach if that's appropriate, or to that building's administrator. And if their response is unsatisfactory, you would take that to the superintendent, and then finally to the board. Often, a committee of the board is a more productive place to bring concerns than the whole board meeting. Another option is a community conversation that takes place once a month, and I'll talk about that more when we get to the community engagement report. And that said, we welcome public comment, because this is the only part of the meeting that is reserved for public participation. We request that you demonstrate respect to our school community and board in your comments, and remember that personal attacks are not acceptable. We understand there's a lot of strong feelings around recent events, including decisions made in relation to the pandemic and raising of the Black Lives Matter flag, and want to remind you that we're here because we care deeply about this organization and we want it to serve our students to the best of its abilities. We've heard many requests to stop talking about the flags, get on with providing education to our students, and that is what we would like to do. We've heard an extremely wide range of public comment in relation to these flags, and we have a policy in place for future flag requests. We like to focus on supporting our teachers and administrators and serving our students. If you're planning to repeat a comment that's already been made, or you submitted to the board a comment via email, remember, we do hear those and we do pay attention to them. It seems like you're speaking into the void, but we're paying attention. We're a board, we're not a single person, and we make the best decisions through our discussion and consideration of what you have to say. accusations and labeling of certain board members as with us or against us or threatening to leave the district, it doesn't help us help our students. The part about the time limit has been really confusing. Maybe we need to reword it on the bottom of the agenda. It says a minimum of 3 minutes. That doesn't mean that you have a minimum of 3 minutes to speak with any limit, any length of time. It means that within the time, we're not going to limit you to less than 3 minutes. 3 minutes. We are going to limit you to 3 minutes. If there were only, say, 5 people here, you'd get more time because we have 20 minutes allotted. But even if there's more people, we're still going to cut you off at 3 minutes. Please cede the podium to the next person. There are people who work really hard to keep their statements under 3 minutes. At the conclusion of public comment, there will be an opportunity for the board and superintendent to respond to any comments made for clarification or to answer any questions that can be done easily. If there are responses that require further attention or the input of others in the district, please leave us your contact information or write to us at MRUUSD.board@university.gov. Thank you. And finally, please keep your masks on. We can hear you. So first, we have Brian Ferguson.
Good evening. My name is Brian Ferguson. I'm a resident in Wallingford with 2 children attending Middlebury Union High School. Today is September 15th, 2021. I'm here to appeal to the school board to take action regarding the superintendent's recent careless and negligent management regarding the flag ceremony on September 7th. On September 8th, I emailed the superintendent to ascertain the risk assessment and security assessment plans regarding the flag ceremony. The superintendent's response is of utmost concern and requires the board's immediate action. I specifically asked the question to the superintendent, who directed or requested a security assessment for raising of non-governmental flags at MRU. Mr. Youngs responded, this action was neither directed nor required.
Please raise your mouth.
Thank you, I'm going to continue. This is alarming coming from the man responsible for the safety and security of our children. The superintendent felt as though no security assessment was directed or required. However, the superintendent declared enough security threat was present that he directed school resource officer Mr. Hoffman to request backup in closed campus grounds. Of the multiple police backup that responded, at least one was prepared wearing a tactical vest. In addition, no security assessment being directed or required, the superintendent, in conjunction with Mr. Wiederman, directed school buses to be parked in front of the building to shield students from threat and distraction of protest and media outlets. So again, according to the superintendent, no threat assessment was required, yet he clearly made preparations for threats he was aware of. It is outrageous and delusional to believe no threat was present. Board Member French, your own property was vandalized regarding your support of BLM, was it not? Also, Member French, is it also accurate that your former neighbor Tabitha Moore also encountered vandalism and threats of violence to the extent she felt she needed to move? This was widely publicized. Tabitha herself commented to the Rutland Herald on September 11, 2020, quote, it's been heating up for a while, since June. A number of non-specific threats and different incidents have been growing. Those are multiple examples of violence right here in our community regarding this situation, without adding the fact the flag was stolen the very night after it was raised, and without adding the images we all have in our minds of violent riots, burning cities, and horrific school violence. Regardless how you feel about the BLM flag, maybe you support it, maybe you don't, maybe you're neutral on the topic. No matter how you feel, the facts remain a credible threat is present. The superintendent, principal, school resource officer, and complicit board members, complicit board members assume risk for our children without any notification to parents, and most appalling, without parental consent. In the time the flag was requested until it was flown has approximately been 15 months in which 30 regular meetings, not including committee meetings, occurred. During that time, not once was the security of students and staff considered. The superintendent has acted in a most careless and negligent manner, placing hundreds of souls at risk without any notification to parents, and most shocking, without any consent from parents. Simply put, the superintendent decided what was safe for our children without our permission. For these reasons stated above, I plead to the board to make a motion and another to second and force a vote to terminate the superintendent effective immediately. Any members opposing this vote are hereby identified as complicit with the superintendent for placing our children at risk with blatant disregard to parental rights and should resign immediately. Thank you for your time. Two minutes, 50 seconds.
Mr. Lee.
Good evening. My name is Richard Lee from Clarendon. I came to
Mr.
express...
Lee, would you please
I can't speak with it. I can hardly breathe. My eyes, I can hardly read this.
Would you like to submit your,
No, I'd like to read it right here live. That's why I showed up tonight. Okay? So, I came to express my disgust at the so-called school board members who shirk their duty to provide the best education for our children while defying the wishes of logical parents in our district. Your agenda in our schools is unacceptable. You teach our children a curriculum contrary to parents' beliefs. Since when do we call boys girls and girls boys in our school without first approving this with the parents? You push your political propaganda on our students. You do not believe in America and seek to destroy her. I'm sorry I'm shaking. I'm so angry it's unbelievable. Through the guise of BLM, which does nothing to help blacks in America, you promote Marxism without total disclosure. You sneak around to achieve your evil goals. You prevent taxpayers' participation at all levels. You have completely ignored important questions that I personally emailed to each of you. Instead, I was deferred by Adrian, the chair of the board, to seek my answers from the superintendent. And if I wanted to do that, I would have done that. I purposely took my time, as invaluable as some may consider it, to reach out. Crickets. You use taxpayers' money to fund your political agenda. I wonder if you would promote any of this garbage if it was you paying for it without the help of us taxpayers. You sit during our national anthem. You turn your back and argue with taxpayers at board meetings. You have made a commitment to fly the Marxist flag for 90 days. Will you keep your word? We have a fine sheriff in this room that BLM completely defies through defunding and promoting attempts on their lives. This is disgraceful. You completely ignored our brave patriots that I spoke of at the last meeting, who died defending America's rights. Instead, you had to hoist the Marxist flag on this school. You couldn't wait for those proud patriots to be buried. And in light of 9/11, how shameful can you be? In spite of this list, which is far from complete, you have the audacity to demand respect from those you completely disrespect and hold absolutely no regard for.
Mr. Lee?
I'm done in two
sorry.
seconds.
Your time is up, and if you continue, you're out of order. Please
I'm
see
not
the
out of
podium.
order.
Please see the podium for the next speaker.
I'm sorry if I hurt your
Thank you,
feelings.
and please submit that to us in writing if you'd like to.
So what, so you can ignore it?
The next speaker is Beth Aiken.
I'm going to request that Beth be allowed to use the microphone at the end of this table, since she is going to be standing in a place where people have been unmasked. Would that be a possibility for her?
That would be completely acceptable.
Thank you.
I watched a YouTube video and I saw some people that sometimes attend this meeting and they were yelling at students because they were raising Black Lives Matter flag. Some students were scared to go outside because of the adults that were yelling at middle school and high school students as grown adults. We also learned so much from the BLM conversations. Thank you.
Madison Aiken?
My name is Madison Aiken, and my pronouns are she and her. Because of public school education, many here will understand the importance of me stating my pronouns. Many students understand too, and are free to have their pronouns respected. Thank you, public school employees and leadership, and the LGBTQ community for this. We know to acknowledge that we are gathered on the unceded and stolen land of the West Abenaki. When we celebrate Indigenous Peoples Day next month, we have our West Abenaki community members to thank. I also want to thank everyone in government and public school leadership who worked with the West Abenaki leadership for decades. to make this our new normal, our identity, and our inclusion. I tried to have an ASL interpreter translate my remarks tonight. I hope this will be possible in the future meeting. Thank you in part to the equity work in public schools for helping me know to ask for this. Thank you to the deaf community for your advocacy work, which makes us all better humans. Finally, I wanted to acknowledge that I was concerned about attending this meeting because of the hostile environment anti-equity and anti-movement for Black lives have created in our community. Skipping this part. Skipping that part. Skipping that part. I hope that, I'm going to go on to, I hope that the people who have stolen the flags, if they are identified, I hope they get the best of what public school has to offer. I hope they get the restorative practices that we do in public school. I hope they get the education and the opportunity to engage with community members who disagree with what they did and who have the opportunity to explain the importance of inclusion and equity and Black Lives Matter. Thank you very much.
Next is Paula Allen.
These days is a disappointment. I think the board needs to reassess where their hearts are. Is it for the children or is this a political thing? Is this about what you personally want, or is this about the children? Personally, I think some of you need to reevaluate why you're on the school board. I don't think it's about the children in the district. I think we need to focus on what is important to see our children succeed academically. I'm disappointed in the district because my daughter's grades have declined over the years. She's been bullied. Her anxiety has increased. We have staff talked to other staff in earshot how she is facing her health issues. 2 years ago, she was kicked off the cheer team because of her grades. I found out she was failing one day before the end of the marking period. I went to parent-teacher conference. No faculty member called or emailed me to inform of this until the cheer coach called the day before. Why is that? I fought for my daughter from getting kicked off the team as probation like others in the past. This is included in the discussion with Young. We lost. Life lesson for her. It took her 2 weeks for her grades to come up. Liz, I have no clue who you are before watching board meetings. If I was Adrian or you, I would be embarrassed. You are a disgrace. You should never be able to represent any type of
Personal
board.
attacks are not appropriate.
You should have been forcing handing the resignation, or you should have handled
Excuse me.
in the future.
Allen.
I think it should be a vote of money. She's been disrespectful.
I do, but that is not part of public comment.
Due to your interrupting community members when they talk and engage in verbal arguments, disrespecting fellow community members, turning your back and questioning people's heritage should be more than a cause to resign. Adrian, in your title, you should never be allowed any of the conduct to happen, especially the verbal arguments which you sat there and did nothing to the community members' book. This lack of professionalism you should have shown over time. You should have resigned for the failure of doing your job. Liz, your apologies are not apologies. When you apologize, you should apologize, not give excuses. We can't teach our children to apologize when a board member doesn't. I highly recommend that the board looks at their own policy where it states in there the following. B1, board education. It is the policy of the district to encourage and support board members' efforts and remain knowledgeable about those roles and the issues with which they deal. Board members are expected to take advantage of opportunities to understand the roles, educational issues in general, school programs, etc. B2, board goal settings and evaluations. The board will participate in goal settings and self-evaluation activities developed or recommended by the superintendent at least annually. Board interpersonal communication skills. As a parent, I'd like to see if this has been done. Adrian David, I know you should be appointing some of the board members to take classes in how to deal with the community better. Honestly, if the goal settings and evaluations were done, then I question why there is complaints against the board or board members. Some continue to not follow the rules. The policies with conduct of their behavior should have been removed from their seats. To me, this is the board
Excuse me,
member.
Ms. Allen, your time is up.
No, I said I only have one sentence left.
If you would like to submit that in writing to us,
I would love to.
thank you very much. Crystal Evans.
Crystal Usher, Clarendon, Vermont. I don't really have anything prepared to speak about tonight specifically. Just reiterate what I said before, which is the decline in athletics and academics. Bruce has mentioned the Start 360 topic and an ad hoc committee to see why children are leaving our schools. At last meeting, he brought it up and not one of you spoke. No one responded to him, except for myself in the audience. So I'm not sure why there is a gap in not wanting to better our children's education or their athletic opportunities, but to me that is disturbing. Whether we are a low-rated school or a top-rated school, we should always want to do better for our youth, our children, and even as adults. So why that's not happening and why it's taking 8 or 9 months to schedule a retreat with seeing no deadlines, I'm glad to see the goals are finally being shared tonight, but the length it's taking to make decisions is really unacceptable. If you email the board, you'll get a response from Adrian stating that the delay is due to a group of folks being loud. So the group of folks that are speaking are each individuals that have their own experience, that are experiencing and experience concerns for their children. And I don't know why these concerns continue to be ignored. We've had a series of soccer games, the girls' varsity games. They're not doing well at all. We need to see a focus, and that's not a unique thing. They did very poorly last year. It's nothing that can be corrected overnight, but it needs to be corrected. There needs to be some incentive and focus on both our academics and athletics. I spoke with 2 first-year college students this afternoon, both of them ill-prepared for college classes. One of them was an honor student here, received very high accolades, and she's having a hard time adjusting to college. I'm sure a lot of students have a tough transition at that time, but we really need to focus on making that transition easier for them. I know the flag takes up a lot of time, but regardless of that, there's other items on the agenda that need to be a focus. And if the meetings need to go late or start earlier than as a board, that's something you guys need to determine. Set goals and make things happen. But it's hard to, last meeting it was respect. Respect needs to go both ways. It's hard for the public to continue to be respectful when, one, we're not being respected to begin with, and we're not seeing any real outcomes other than now the flag is flown, so maybe we can move on from that topic, at least for 90 days, and then we'll see where we're at. But I really encourage you all to work on making decisions and creating some deadlines so that the public and our kids can see some real movement here. I know personally my kids have stopped asking me about the meetings because I give them the same answer every time. If I were to show them the agenda, it looks like I don't want to go in repetitive.
And Christine Billing.
Again, Christine Billing, Shrewsbury. Mark and I would like to respectfully ask the board to please make a motion for each of the following to be warrant agenda items for the next board meeting. But Bruce, thank you because you already took care of one of them. My first one was for test scores. Just to say, this has been requested multiple times by multiple people. The public knows online sources our district is failing educationally and needs to be evaluated by the board. In my opinion, the primary goal for the school needs to be education. Athletics has also been brought up multiple times. And then I also have the equity committee to be reformed to include staff, board, and community members. This was brought up during public comment that a person was not allowed to be on the equity committee due to their personal and political beliefs. I further researched and could not find where community or board members were on the current equity committee. It appears to only be selected staff. This really needs to change because equity is a real hot topic, okay? D, mentioned many times was the superintendent yearly evaluation procedures policy. This needs to be developed as mentioned in the spring. At this point, it appears the board evaluates the superintendent from subjective soft parameters of how he reacts with the board. The scope of his responsibilities and his net effect on the community is much greater. This issue really struck me as important during Adrian's public apology on May 5th, 2021. She said the following words: "In fact, I was trying to counter what I believe to be an organized effort to turn the board and to remove our superintendent in a very pointed and unfair way, since a number of accusations could only be factually corrected by breaking confidentiality." Here lies the issue for me. I read this as Adrian feared the loss of the superintendent, and therefore he's not able to objectively evaluate his broad scope of responsibilities and expectations. If there was a better way to evaluate him yearly, utilizing parameters across the board, staff, and community, I feel that any of these fears would prove to be A, legitimate, or B, illegitimate. More importantly, this would provide a transparent examination of the superintendent and provide the board a view of the superintendent's efficacy. This type of performance evaluation will only accentuate the positive and correct the areas of failure. We are submitting another request for information letter. You're going to get it attached. And again, thank you for your volunteer time. It takes a lot of time. I've been trying to attend policy meetings when I can, and I'm sorry, I got to give you kudos. You run a big meeting. But anyway, we appreciate it, and we have faith that our district will prevail, and once again, it will be what it was once. Sorry, my memories of this district was very positive.
The next
I have a
item
question.
on the agenda.
Do we have time left for public comment?
No, we're actually beyond our
I thought we
our
had
agenda
20
time at
minutes.
this point. So, no, we had 20 minutes allotted for public comment, and we've spent more than that already. So we're moving on right now to the board discussion of public comment, and this is an opportunity for board members and the superintendent to clarify anything that is easily clarified right now, or answer any questions that are easily answered. Otherwise, we may need to direct people to another source of information or look into it a little more deeply. And if you've given us your information or you've written to the board email address, then we can go. So there's a couple that I can just speak to right now, just to answer Ms. Billings' questions. The equity committee does include 2 board members currently, and the superintendent evaluation does not involve simply the board. It also, as it is currently, involves building administrators and the principal officers.
Okay, because it was brought up in the spring to reevaluate how those evaluations are done, and I thought it was a really important topic.
I'm sorry, this is not a time for us to be discussing. This is just a time for us to be responding and continuing. Is there anything else that anyone feels that they want to know?
Yeah, I'll say something. We have talked about including community and teachers in this discussion, in the evaluation. It would be for next year if that's what we go. But it has been, we want to try, some of us want to try to bring the community into this discussion. So that's what we're talking about.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to the approval of minutes from September 1st, 2021. Did everyone have a chance to look at that? We need a motion to approve in a second, and then we'll discuss anything that needs to change about them. Thank you. Thank you. Is there anything that needs to be corrected in those? I wasn't there, so I can't speak to it.
Government code really. Love October is our homecoming. October 2nd is our homecoming events. We're going to be doing a dance on the Friday the 1st, and then the whole week leading up to that is our normal Spirit Week, with every day is a theme day, and then we get to that on Friday, and the dance Friday night. And also, to accommodate our football game on Saturday, there is an SAT Saturday morning, so we're actually bumping the football game back to 2 o'clock, so that if you have any athletes that are taking SAT, they have time to get ready for the game. So, a lot going on. And one thing I know is going to be special for Len, I'm still working on student reps for the board. I've talked to a few kids who have been, talking to me here and there, but My goal is to nail that down by next week, and we can see how that shakes out. Any questions?
I was planning on asking about that today. So I'm glad to hear
I
it.
read your mind. Any questions on anything? Yes.
Tyler, when will we hear about Karen?
I believe, I don't have a definite time frame, but my guess is they're moving on this fairly quickly. Dave, I think it's by the end of the week, isn't it?
Yeah, I heard within the week, but
Yeah.
we'll see. You know,
End of
she
the month.
interviewed with the state board today. I believe it goes to the secretary in some capacity, and I'm not sure how the pipeline back to the state board works, so we'll open the next few days. As soon as we know, you will know that.
And Deborah was in the, she actually filmed it for us so we could see the presentation we've actually done in this room. And what Deborah told us, and she can talk about here when she comes up, is that she nailed it. She really did nail it. So. Any other questions? Thank you.
I have a question.
Sure, go ahead.
How is the general morale then when the kids are back in school? Are they excited to be back in class like every day and not home virtually, or are you getting a little pushback sometimes?
No, I think to be in high school, you get pushback.
Well, yeah, teenagers, yeah.
Yeah, normal teenagers. You know, if I can put it this way, my biggest fight right now in the building, and this is not a huge fight, and there's only a couple of kids, is really masks. You know, a lot of kids like to wear the mask under their nose, and they'll constantly walk through the hall, okay, put that for me, and they do it right away. You know, so I mean, the morale in the building is good. You know, it really is. The kids they're eager to be here, and I think that shows in our attendance numbers. They want to be here.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when we went from having lunch, I meet with the kids the first day, all the classes, all the grades. And when I told them we're eating lunch in the classroom, you see it's just a little head drop and, you know, not this again. And then when I met with the kids a day after that and said, hey, we're switching, this did not work. You know, we have another plan in place. And I said, you know, you're going to be eating here or cafeteria. They were all for it. So I mean, small things like that, I think really build morale and really build things back to normalcy. And that's where we're really trying to get to. You know, and the kids' biggest question to me lately has been, hey, when can we ditch the masks? You know, so, and I'll be really honest with you. When I was talking to them, I said, I need your help. I firmly need every student in this room, I need your help. I need you to wear a mask properly so that we can get to a point where we're not wearing masks. Because my main job with wearing a mask is keeping our kids safe and healthy. And if I can keep them safe and healthy in the classroom and in school, hopefully we can ditch the mask soon and see where we go. Thank you. Any other questions? Yeah, thank you.
Let's hear from Kim, and then we'll have Maggie on deck.
Good evening. So I just want to give you another update. I gave you an update about a month ago about the start of the athletic season. So we have now filled all positions, high school, middle school, and elementary for the fall season. And currently, right now, we have a population at 7 fall at Oliver of 374 students, and we have 37% of that student body participating in athletics, 138 total fall athletes. We have 8 students on a member-to-member here playing football, 1 from Lehigh, 7 from MSJ. We have a member-to-member with MSJ for our boys soccer team. If you've seen any of that in the newspaper, they're doing very well over there. I went to their first game, and the MSJ community was very welcoming to our students. They had nothing but positive things to say. The coaches, Peter's coaching with Josh Souza, and it just really gels really well together. So I encourage you, if you can get to a game, it needs to be worth it. We are going to be hosting MSJ in West Rutland here on October 7th. So our 2 seniors have the opportunity to play one last time on our field, and we'll recognize them as their senior night here. We'll have one at MSJ as well, but we will be recognizing them here. Our middle school coach, Brittany Blanchard, held a summer camp for soccer for grades 5 through 8 here, August 16th through the 19th and the 23rd through the 26th. And she had anywhere from 20 to 25 kids a day attending that. It was free of charge. And the kids seemed to really have a good time doing that. Varsity cheer coach Bailey Austin held a cheer camp with her team to raise some money for the team, and that took place at Peak Performance last weekend. We have an outside camera now, kind of like we did for the winter season in the gym. So all home events that are played on the main field, you can watch on NFHS Network. There is a fee of $10 per month. Like Tyler mentioned, October 2nd is our homecoming day here, but it really kicks off on Monday that week. Our cross-country team hosts a meet that day for middle school and high school. We have about 10 to 12, if not more, schools that come and participate in that. Middle school football has a game on the 30th. Middle school soccer goal teams have a game on the 30th. The middle school girls will play on October 2nd here. The varsity girls will play on the 2nd, and football will play on the 2nd. And we will be honoring our state champion cheerleaders and giving out their plaques at halftime of the football game. So that's in the works right now for that to happen. And I believe our youth cheer will be performing as well, like they have in the past. Big picture goals for Mill River 7 through 12. I've been working with other ADs in the area. They have established athletic hall of fames at their schools. So I'm looking to gather information on how they've gone through that process and how they go about nominating past students to be a part of that, and coaches. If you've been in our gym, you've seen that there's a VPA Hall of Fame banner. We've added, I think, 3 or 4 names to that in the last couple of years, so just adding some more, or nominating more past coaches and athletes for that. I watched the board meeting 2 weeks ago, and one of the community members asked, had brought up a point about the varsity softball field not having a scoreboard. That has been in the works. Cost is a big issue with that. I have received some quotes, but it's a matter of where it would be stationed, where it could be used for both softball and the middle school soccer field, and it wouldn't be in the way because our middle school softball field, our varsity softball field and middle school soccer field is the outfield of the softball field, so there's some work that needs to be done with that. If you've seen our backstop for baseball, it definitely needs to be replaced. The metal is coming down and put back together with pieces of other metal. The fencing down the third baseline has been cut. Just replacing that, and then we talk about, just how we can upgrade our outside facilities, fields, anything like that. So those are just some big picture. It's not going to happen overnight. It's not going to happen, in the next year, but what we can work on going forward. There are some postings on School Spring for coaching jobs. Varsity girls basketball, JV girls basketball, JV boys basketball, and varsity baseball. So we will be starting interviews for those positions. And then I just wanted to give you an update on where we're at with elementary. So back in June, I gave a presentation with Dave about how we're trying to roll elementary into a K-12 oversee of coaches. So we've started that with soccer and cheerleading. And with soccer, we've had 50 district kids sign up. They're not all 5th and 6th graders. It's really pre-K through 6th grade. So right now, Jesse Dodge, who works in our district, is the coach for 5th and 6th grade. Eric McHugh, who's the AD at Clarendon, is working on putting together clinics for the weekends for those pre-K to 4 students. And then, down the road next year, looking at how we can include 3rd and 4th graders, because there are schools that have those teams that we could get together and play. So, like I said, it's a work in progress. It's our first time, so we're trying to do the best that we can. Cheerleading, elementary cheerleading has 11 registered right now, and Carolyn and Annie are helping with that. So that'll get started in the next couple weeks, I believe. And then looking at winter, I'll be meeting with the elementary principals to discuss positions for basketball and what that looks like what they've had in the past, because we had nothing last year. Just getting up to date on what that looks like. That was a lot. Does anybody have any questions?
How's our football field looking after the couple little divots that seemed to get into a little while ago?
They're filled. It's dying, like it usually does. But it's fine. It's doing what it needs to do, serving its purpose. Yeah.
Glad to hear it.
Yep.
Thank you for the update.
Thank you.
A lot going on.
Let's have Maggie followed by Dan and then Fred.
Good evening. So, great
start of the year up at Shrewsbury. We started off before school began. We did a meet the teacher for some of our families may have never even been in our building before and met their teachers. So we did that right before school started, and about half of our families showed up for that to kick off our school year. We're going to have an open house also on the 30th of September, so on the evening of the 30th. This past week, our students kind of memorialized 9/11 by thanking our local first responders. They wrote thank you cards, and the younger classes did a sign and learned about the roles of first responders in their community. In the classroom, some of the older classes engaged in a more 9/11 specific curriculum activity as well in that. Lots of the classrooms are creating their class compacts, which are kind of student-led classroom rules, which is really cool to watch them engage in that and seeing all the different things that they come up with to tell their peers and their teacher what they need for a learning environment and that they can engage in. And it's super useful when you're trying to redirect kids later on as well. We have the school garden, which is like a work in progress, but some work is being done to get a fence in. So there's now, it's been brush hogged and the old fence has been removed. So hopefully that will happen before the snow flies so that we can get ready in the spring to kind of complete that project. We also have lots of kiddos who are going into our after-school program. I think Carrie will talk more about that, but super excited students and parents about all the great things that are happening after school, and having our teachers are providing workshops for those students. I think that is all I have for Shrewsbury right now.
I just wanted to thank you for doing the work on 9/11. I think it's important that that was included in the agenda for that day, so thank you.
Good evening, Dan Betts from Wallingford Elementary. We've had I would say, fantastic start. Definitely the best year I've had to a start in person at Wallingford. So you got that as my first year to start in person at Wallingford. So it's another first for me, right? But the message that just keeps coming round and round is how much our staff cares about the students, but also each other. And so everyone's got everyone's backs and they're looking out for one another. And that's definitely a theme of Wallingford. So this year we started fully staffed, which was super awesome. We had some great welcome back staff meetings. And then we also had an awesome back to school night where parents, families, kids, staff, even staff that aren't necessarily required to come to back to school night, we're all there. And it was just great to be out in the parking lot and seeing everyone face to face, kind of 50-50, some masks on. And I want to give a shout out to our PTO because they helped provide ice cream. So it was a nice ice cream social. And as silly as that sounds, I heard a lot of talk about the ice cream, and I think it drew in the crowds, which then helped just build those relationships. And that's one of our major focuses. So, and then another second shout out to PTO. Last year was crazy, and everyone knows we don't need to relive that, but it was a challenge, and PTO just kept trying to sneak in to let themselves be known and support as they could. But this year it's refreshing to be able to see them in person and see their works come to fruition. So they came and set up over the weekend the book fair. So our book fair is in full force this week. We've got schedules, so kids are coming through checking all the books, and they'll start purchasing those tomorrow and Friday. So we're excited about that. The one position that we did have a fresh or a full start, fully staffed, is we have a first grade teacher who is out on maternity leave currently. So we did have to find someone to cover that. I've had the posting up for quite a while, and yet no one has applied who is officially licensed. But we have a substitute teacher who we've had covered in the last year and this year, who is fantastic. We designed a couple days for her to come in and actually work with the first grade teacher. So she got to know the teacher, the program, got to know the kids, even subbed for a day in there before maternity leave started. So it was just a super smooth, seamless transition. And I had a staff meeting today, and I kind of started the shout outs the way that we start each meeting, but I would say almost half of the shout outs were all about the way people are wrapping around the first grade, the whole team, and just supporting one another. So we've got not only the substitute teacher in there who's very positive and supportive, and she's well liked by the staff and the students, which is very important. We have paras this year that we had funded through the ESSER plan, so we have a couple extra paras. So we have a para that's in first. I actually moved her from pre-K up to first because she's been trained in the curriculum in both math and ELA, Joan Neely. And we have our reading interventionists have stepped it up and gone beyond their expectations, and they've been coming in there and just providing modeling lessons of phonics and some of those reading instructional strategies that are extremely crucial for first graders, right? Because they're just like really starting to dig in. And then same with our math interventionists. And so it's like an entire team effort. And then just when I thought everything was fully supported, I had a conversation after our staff meeting this evening with somebody else that was talking about another way that they're supporting behind the scenes. So it's just this constant looking after one another and holding each other up to make sure that we're the best we can be, so we can be there to support the students in the best way possible. Other than that, I would say I sent out a parent message about this. It kind of blows my mind having students go from summertime where they don't have to have masks on, and if I was a kid in the summertime, I'd be running rampant all over the place. But then transitioning straight back into the classroom, putting the masks on, it has not been an issue. The kids have been just positive, looking forward to come to school. So it's been very refreshing to have a start after a year like last year, where it just feels like everyone is excited to be there and be working together. We did do a 9/11 tribute last week. I did a morning announcements, and we had a moment of silence, and then the teachers, they all had their various different activities that were age appropriate. But we definitely want to recognize not only those who had been heroes fighting to survive and fighting to help others to survive during that whole horrific event, but even those that lost their lives years after, just from all the dust and gnarly stuff that some people don't think about. So the impact is still there. And near and dear to even some of my staff's heart, there were things that were shared with me where staff was actually somewhat uncomfortable because it was still like a sensitive issue 20 years later. And they ran with that to just show the kids like how much of an impact this had and still has on our nation. Any questions? Short and sweet. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, thank you, Dan.
Dr. Fred, how about we hear from Carrie, Jody, and Cora?
Oh, Fred's not last.
No, I do not.
Somebody has to follow.
Yes, somebody does have to follow. It's not kind.
I can answer the enthusiasm thing. I think most elementary kids like to be in school, and we measure that by their smiles and their excitement, and also attendance. In the first 2 weeks, we had an average of 5 kids out. We have about 160 kids in the school, so that was about 3%, which was really good. And then Monday, boom, we got hit. 25 people were off. So we obviously make our phone calls and see what that, but we dug a little bit deeper. And a handful of those are out because of a symptom or two that they're getting tested. But also, One of our larger employees is shut down this week, so 7 of our families are on vacation. So that took a bunch of our kids away for the week. But for the most part, we've had really good attendance. They've been, in school and engaged. We had to change our start to the year a little bit. We'd love to have a opening barbecue where all the families come and, eat with the kids, and we do have some activities. We kind of canceled the family, we canceled the family part because just a few days ahead of that, we had some spikes in the area, and we thought, well, we don't want kids going home or having to quarantine right away. So we canceled that, but we still had the barbecue for the kids, and we had a water slide, and they seem to enjoy that pretty well. One of our bright spots we've looped is where we can. And in the looping process, we're at least a couple of weeks ahead. The teachers are really, they know the kids know the routines. The teachers have to learn another grade level, but they were all behind that so that they could take that relationship building piece and just move forward. So they started and they're in their academics right now, probably 2 to 3 weeks ahead of where they would have been had they started the other. The tough part for us is that we're short-staffed, and we're trying to, hire paras where we need them and whatnot. But again, like Dan said, the whole team is just standing up behind one another, filling in where gaps need to be filled. And the kids are covered. They got the proper supervision, and we're doing the best we can engagement-wise with fewer people. But the kids don't recognize that. It's just the adults running a little bit crazier. We've got the interventionists working with us to do baseline testing, so we've got that started. So we're a little bit ahead of schedule on that one too, because what we're going to do is create more groups, more small groups for ELA in the primary, so we can meet with them every day, so those kids can be put into needs assessment groups or strength assessment groups so that they can work together with an adult, hopefully in small numbers, and get that 1-to-1, 1-to-3, 1-to-5 attention that they need to boost that a little bit. We are going to use our ESSER funds for after-school tutoring so that we can get all the kids that could use the support and the extra help after school, because there's just not a lot of time during the day to fit that in. So hopefully we can get those kids the help that they need after school, and get them caught up and pushed ahead. That's what I have. Anything else? Question? Mr. Cover everything else. Thank you.
Thank you, Brad. Good evening, everyone. So for my after-school update tonight, I thought that I would share with you 5 short but actually quantifiable accomplishments that we've had already this year in just 2 weeks. Number 1, for the 5th year in a row, all 4 of our elementary programs actually were fully planned and did a full program startup on day 1 of school. And that might not sound like much, but statewide, only about 10 or 15% of all after-school programs start the first day of school. So that's kind of cool. Number 2, Shrewsbury Program, and actually Maggie swooped me a little bit on this, but under the leadership of our new director, Alice Coates-Martin, Shrewsbury actually opened this year with a staffing structure that has a 400% increase in the number of teachers involved. We had 1 last year, we have 5. 400% increase. What's so cool about that is one of them is there every day with the site director and is completely integrating the school day with after school, which is just absolutely beautiful. So that's number 2. Number 3, also in Shrewsbury, 55% of all K-6 learners in the school are registered for after school. The highest percentage we've ever had in the past has been 35%. And that's Alice, but that's also teacher involvement, frankly. When kids like the teachers and the teachers are involved, they will do anything the teachers offer, actually. And that's kind of what happened, even though it's all, of course, high quality stuff. Number 4, Tinmouth School. Tinmouth is led by Lisa Barrett, who actually is Dan's wonderful first grade substitute person that we're sharing. The average daily attendance at Tinmouth's after-school program, this is in 2 weeks, has already increased 60% over last year. We've struggled the last years. We've struggled with little schools with after-school programs that are really robust. And actually, we have an average of 15 kids a day from Tinmouth that are attending after-school program. The number 5, which is actually Tinmouth also, as of just today, we've doubled the number of students that are designated eligible for child care assistance. We went from 5 last year to 10. And you might think, 5 students, that's not a big deal, but those 5 students actually translated to $12,000 of additional support just for Tinmouth after-school program this year. So those are my 5, and any questions at all? Oh, okay. Thank you.
Hi guys, I was up next, right? All right, so in my first update of the year, I went over the 4 levers of MTSS as major places where we can help students. So those are my main focus for the year. And those are educational support fees, coordinated curriculum, needs-based professional development, and local comprehensive assessment systems. So we started our professional development before students came back with a focus on, excuse me, I am not on a marathon, I'm just having a medical issue, so I'm going to be camping a little bit. It is not COVID, I promise. A focus on literacy training through Founders and Canal for elementary students, and a focus on instruction for high school and middle school teachers. Now again, this was based on needs-based PD, so that means that the decisions were made based on looking at data and where we think we need to do better, and most importantly, based on what teachers said in a before school started survey about what they want to have, because teachers know their own practice best, and so it's important to listen to them. We've started our PLCs. This year, our focus is going to be on using data, our own classroom data, to design interventions for students or group of students in our classroom, look at how those interventions are working and come back to the group to reflect on it, as well as the theme of collective efficacy, meaning that together we can make a major impact on our schools. So every single PLC in the district, K-12, is doing the same PLC curriculum with different facilitators, and we're going to check in with teachers throughout that time to see how it's working for them. We have another release day, half day coming up in September. The focus on that will be some work on some equity work, and then a continuation of the literacy and assessment work that we have started in August. Any questions? All right, see you later.
Thank you.
After choral, let's hear from Gary, Stan, and Brian, please.
Hi, everyone. This evening, my update is short and simple. Just want to make you aware that my colleague Maggie and I participated in a lengthy webinar yesterday that was designed to sort of gear us up for the special ed monitoring that I have spoken to you about previously. We had a couple surprises come to us. I shouldn't say that we're surprised, but we were a little surprised. This year, the monitoring process does look like it's going to involve this board quite a bit around some different things. So I expect to be having more conversations with you as the year goes on about that. So stay tuned, more to come, but we're getting ready to gear up and get that process kicked off. Will be a year-long, very intensive, very cumbersome amount of work, which is not thrilling considering the circumstances that we're all, trying to work under, but we're going to do our best. On the special services side, we're still, sort of in the phase where we're getting kids back to school, and we're administering some of our beginning of the year assessments that are required in special ed so that we can figure out if our students had any regression or learning loss over the summer. So we're trying to kind of pull that data and figure out, where kids might need a change in services or might need something tweaked with their program. So we're, kind of carrying that out. Definitely still dealing with some staffing shortages in the special ed realm, particularly on the paraeducator side of things, which is making things tough. We're definitely being creative and have just, I can't say enough, just awesome folks that are just working their butts off to make sure that kids are taken care of and that we're providing the services that we know that students need. So I just want to give special ed staff a shout out on that. But we're making headway and we're still here. So that's where we're at. Any questions? Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Mom.
Good evening. I am very happy to report that I have very little to report. Because in my realm, if you guys don't know we're here, that means everything is going fairly well. We do remain fairly short-staffed. We're lucky at this moment that the type of tasks that we're involved with allow us to keep our head above water at this moment. We are finding that we do have some options that are presenting themselves to us, however, for staff. So after basically almost 2 years, we're finally possibly seeing some relief in that area. Regarding transportation, we are right on the cusp. One way or the other, we could have a problem. Right now, we are able to cover our regular routes without any problem, but we already had some situations where we have had a driver out and we've had to combine routes. So we could very quickly find ourselves in a situation where we have more difficulty with being able to provide our regular transportation if we have an affordable driver out at the time. That's also leading us to have some difficulties with being able to provide transportation for sporting events and also for other extracurricular activities. We are getting, Kim has been very helpful in this issue. We are finding other ways to provide transportation for some of our sporting events. So that's where we are. I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have. Yes, sir.
Just a question on the fields.
Yes.
How's that working?
I have not received any complaints. I think, Kim, you're happy with the way the fields are looking at this point. It is helping us with our situation being short-staffed. It's a worry that we no longer have internally. So it's allowing the folks that used to have to go out and do that type of work to work inside the buildings through the possibility. So I think it's working out well.
Great, thank you.
I love the sign out front.
To be quite frank with you.
Now that we finally have it.
Well, that was supposed to go on the side of a bus.
Yeah, I saw the bus.
But we no longer have a bus that we can spare to put the sign on. Because our buses, the 2 buses that we ordered back in March, I believe, are so delayed at this point that we are putting a lot of money into repairs to older buses while we wait for our newer buses to arrive. Supply chain issues like everything else in the world at this point. All right, thank you.
Thanks, Gary.
Thank you, Gary.
Good evening. I don't have too much to report either, just like Gary. Obviously, school just started 2 weeks ago, so in regards to any kind of financial information on this year, it's still too early to put anything together as to showing where we stand. That should become, the picture should become clear probably within the next couple of weeks as to where things stand financially with our budget for this current year. Currently, we are having our annual audit, which started on Monday for this past year. We are doing that remotely for the next 2 weeks. The auditors, we plan on coming in the last week of September to do anything that cannot be done remotely. And usually that is the big one, which is the single audit, which is an audit of our federal grants. That one usually has to be done in person. I did want to share with a couple items on last year. I would have shared that at the finance meeting a couple weeks ago, but that was canceled. One area that I wanted to go over was the 2019 performance bond that we took out. We had made the statement to the taxpayers back then that that bond would not cost them any extra dollars in taxes, that would be paid for. The bond debt service would be paid for with the savings that we incurred from doing these energy performance jobs or improvements. The last year, which was in 2019, our budgeted cost for utilities was was a little over $412,000. Now the debt service that we took out for the bond this past year was $170,200. So our actual utility cost for last year was $147,082, which was actually $265,560 lower than what we had budgeted in 2019. So that more than covered the debt service payment last year of $170,200. So there was no extra cost to the taxpayers on that bond for this past year. Obviously, there were some factors in our actual costs being lower. The elementary school didn't start up until the middle of October, and the high school started up at the beginning of November. But still, based on missing, school, a month and a half on the elementary side and 2 months on the high school side, the numbers still would have more than meet that $170,000 debt service payment. Another item that we haven't had much experience in the past was with our health insurance plans and offering health reimbursement accounts for the employees. As we gather more data on it, we start to see, somewhat of a trend as to how much is actually being contributed by the employer towards the HRA plan. What happened a couple of years ago is that we switched to high deductible plans, and HRAs were being offered to the employees to help cover those costs of their deductible increase. This past year, and really since the last 3 years, we've been in the range of 55 to 65% usage of what we budgeted for those HRA plans as to what our staff could spend in medical costs. This past year in FY21, we had budgeted $485,000 of HRA expenses, and what actually got spent was a little over $316,000, which was a 65% of what our budget was. And that number has been fairly consistent in the other 2 years since we started this program. And as you know, budget season will be upon us pretty soon. And I just wanted to just give just a point out there to new board members, to the public, as to what our budget really consists of in regards to expense categories. This past year, our current budget was a little over $18.8 million. And that consists of mainly, as we all know, salaries and benefits. And that consisted of 81.27% of that budget goes to salaries and benefits, and leaves roughly 19% for anything else. And there's not a lot of wiggle room, as everybody knows. When it comes to budget, it's a people budget, a staff budget. This current year budget, again, is budgeted along those same lines, where we've got 82% of our costs are salaries and benefits. And last year, just comparing what we actually spent, what we totally spent, those numbers stayed in line. There was 82% of our actual costs for salaries and benefits, and the other 82% being purchase services, supplies, energy, that sort of thing. And again, with the budget season coming up, again, it would be the topic of conversation again is with salaries and benefits. That's all I have. Questions?
Besides buses being back ordered, are you seeing any other supply issues?
Not at the moment. The major one that I've heard of that hasn't occurred yet would be the food service. We have a state contract with Reinhardt Food Service, and so far I have not heard any delay issues in regards to their delivery. But that could happen. They told us to try to plan in advance for larger deliveries, but unfortunately the two schools that use Reinhardt are our smallest schools, and storage is an issue. So that's just something that we just got to monitor.
Good evening, everybody. I will share with you some things that I don't think are going to come up in the goals presentation. So starting with academics, I will be meeting with principals this week and next week. We'll be kicking off the year, picking up the conversation we ended last year with about academics, social emotional well-being, and engagement attendance. Those are those three things that I had shared with you before that AOE has set for us as priorities in this process they call recovery. So what we're doing now that we're back in almost what we would call a normal arrangement after going through the last couple of years, year and a half of really interesting arrangements. Those conversations are going to focus on what are we planning, how are we going to implement it, how are we going to measure and know if it's working or not. You heard Fred talking about after-school tutoring. Great. Who's going to do it? How are they going to do it? How are we going to know it's working? So that we're not getting halfway through the year and we're doing something that isn't. And again, we'll be looking at academics, we'll be looking at social emotional well-being, we'll be looking at engagement and truancy. I'm thrilled that Tyler and Fred both talked about beginning of year attendance. I don't think that's normally something we would be sharing at the beginning of the year. I could be wrong, but I don't ever remember that being something we're focusing on, thinking about, and trying to plan to make better. So I think folks' heads are already there in that process of look at the data, think about what you can do to make things better, and then measure if you're actually making a difference or not. Go back to the drawing board. Like Tyler said about lunches, they had to revise their plan. They had a plan. Sounded good. They got some feedback and input on it. They tried it, and they saw some places where it didn't work the way they thought it was going to work, so they adjusted. And I think that sort of mentality is very important as we move through this year and try and make improvements in those three areas. Health office. Goodness gracious. When we were talking about staffing shortages, I want to say again, we got very lucky when we hired a health services supervisor who was so experienced, knowledgeable, hardworking. Amy Ridlon it's like there was no change, put it that way. Our previous person handed things over to Amy and she ran with them. And the only concern that I have is that our LPNs are working harder than they've ever worked. We are talking about how to support those folks. We're talking about pulling substitutes in. We do have some federal funding that we can earmark for support for the health services. So as they are making those phone calls to parents that first day of school, actually I think Amy was doing some of those before our LPNs, our licensed practical nurses, before they came in, Amy was making those calls. Before school had even started, we were hearing from parents, hey, I got this test result, what should I do? Do I send my kid the first day of school or not? Those phone calls take a lot of time. We have a lot of those. Because right now we're in a pattern where one symptom can cause you to stay home. So we're thinking about how we can strategically pull some substitutes in to help them with that workload. Subs are hard to find, they really are. But it's important that we keep those people running because the work that they're doing to keep our students, our staff, and our communities healthy is huge. So, huge shout out to them and the work that they're doing. Technology, I think I'm getting a shipment tomorrow, and then my outstanding orders are gonna be $200 worth. So that supply chain piece, we had a lot of stuff in. Once we saw that there was a slowdown, we started putting things in 2 months before we ever thought we would, so that we've caught up and we're starting the year in reasonable shape as far as ordering and purchasing goes. Our two guys, Ken and Chris, are phenomenal. They run around the 5 schools and they make sure things work for everybody. People get what they need quickly. We pride ourselves on quick turnaround. Beginning of the year is busy for them. They work a heck of a lot of requests. And probably about 4 years ago, we switched from an annual survey of how are things going with tech support to every time you get help survey. So every time you put a request in and you say, oh, my Wi-Fi on my computer is being a little funky, can somebody come check that out? As soon as Ken or Chris walk down and take a look at it, when they go and they wrap up their paperwork, that person gets an email. And that email has a little 5-star survey and they can give some feedback, anonymous or not, if they choose to put their name. We have maintained over a 4-star average the last 4 years since we switched to that survey style versus the annual survey. So huge kudos to those guys for turning things around quickly, trying to get folks what they need. They can't always get everything everybody wants. BJ, you could probably speak to that. We have resources at our disposal and we have a budget. We can't do everything, but we try to get folks what they need to do what they want to do to best serve their students. That's what matters. And if we get that to folks quickly, they feel supported, and they can work better with their students. That matters. So huge shout out factor too. You heard from some principals about intervention work. Deborah's going to share about intervention work in her goals presentation too, so I'm not going to, that would typically be my third category that I would talk about, so I'm not going to talk about that. What questions do you have?
Thank you, Brian.
So we just pull my notes for a second here. Just something on my eye tonight. So back on September 1st, which was in the last board meeting, I believe the number we were given for students currently in the river was 389 students. And tonight I heard the number at 374.
Yeah,
We lost 15 students in the last 2 weeks.
No idea. I heard the same number.
Okay.
The number I gave you on the first was what was reported.
I'm just curious, because that caught my eye as going,
Yeah.
because that would bring my attention to student retention, but that's, all right, no worries.
We'll pin that down.
Ryan, can I throw something in
Sure.
real quick? Some really funky record-keeping thing that happens that's worth being aware of. There are always about 10 to 20 high school students who start on our rosters.
Okay.
And they're exited out for early college.
Okay.
And it's a funky thing where at the end of the year, they technically graduate with us. So we are asked to pull them back on our books, but they don't count towards average daily membership, which gets us funding from the state. So we're asked to exit them. So a fluctuation of 10 to 20 could be that. There are some students that have left, maybe going to private institutions or going to other public institutions in the area. There are some of those, for sure.
All right, no worries. Thank you.
Brian knows that inside out.
I do the state reporting, so.
Yeah, so we're gonna get our quick update from Dave, and then we're gonna take a 5-minute recess just for people to, get over gallery stuff and whatever on Monday.
Thank you. So, I asked Maria for permission. I think the 2 agenda items down is brief COVID updates. I want to provide you with that information. Before I do that, I just want to piggyback on something that Gary said, and I want to be really, really clear while not being hyperbolic with the board. Gary used the words related to transportation that we are on the cusp, that was what he said. He didn't say on the cusp of what. You just inferred what the what was. I would say we're on the cusp of crisis in that regard when it comes to transportation. you need to know we are not alone. This is a nationwide issue, it's a New England issue, it's a Vermont issue, but you need to also understand the origins of the issue. Bus driver general population for us is an aging population. We are not seeing younger bus drivers coming in the ranks. Our bus drivers continue to get older each year. In addition to that, it's very complex to become a bus driver. In addition to meeting the bus driver license requirements, you have to have a CDL before you can even begin that. We are among the highest paying school bus systems in this area. We pay our bus drivers very well. However, someone with a CDL who's licensed to drive a truck can make much more money driving a truck, and they can do that for an 8-hour day as opposed to a couple hours in the morning and a couple hours in the afternoon. So there's a legitimate labor shortage issue that feeds that dilemma. You would probably say to yourself the same thing we say to ourselves, which is, well, can we think outside the box? Are there other options we can do? And the answer to that is yes. And many of those options have not borne fruit. We have been seeking custodial hires who could kind of, I can't think of the right word, but serve in multiple capacities, serve in multiple roles. We have not been able to find those folks that are interested in both custodial and bus driving, although we do have a couple of our custodians that engage in bus driver work for us. We even have Deputy Hoffman who engages in bus driver work for us as we look outside for external options. The way this manifests is when someone's out, when someone's sick, we have to combine routes. That lengthens routes. Sometimes that notification is nowhere near enough for anyone to be happy, and it creates kind of in the moment, on the fly decisions to try to make sure that we get students home. As we look ahead, I can't project that situation just magically getting better. I think, in addition to the natural declining population of students in Vermont, we'll see a naturally declining group of people that are interested in or willing to drive buses, and that's a real challenge. There are districts out there that have done really creative things, I guess I would say. Matt was speaking before the board meeting in Massachusetts. I believe the governor called in the National Guard to assist with driving buses. So if you want to talk about crisis level, I would consider that a crisis level. I read about a district, and I don't know where they're located, but a district that realized they could not feasibly provide bus transportation at all, and they provided vouchers to families basically to say, we realize there's a cost burden on you to get your kid back and forth to school, so we're giving you X amount of dollars for the school year to assist in that. I'm not proposing that, I'm just suggesting there's all kinds of options out there that folks have look at. Gary, Nicole Peterson, our transportation team are looking at this stuff each and every day, trying to make good decisions. You approved a policy a couple weeks ago that helps us with that decision-making hierarchy and the way we approach those things, but I just want you to be aware of the dilemma. It is a big dilemma for us. I'll pause for any questions on that. Great. COVID update. We are very fortunate as of this moment. We have not had any positive cases in our schools since school began. Our neighboring district cannot say the same. We're seeing some districts really struggle with positive cases and needing to quarantine classes, etc. I would not suggest that there's anything magical we are doing other than trying to be diligent and vigilant about following the protocols with masks and washing hands and creating distance when we can, and doing all the things we know we're supposed to do in order to make that work. We know cases will come. When they do, our contact tracers are ready, and we will follow protocols that look a lot like they did last year in terms of investigating, determining close contacts, notifying families, me notifying the broader community, etc. We're going to let you know on surveillance testing status. Some of you maybe even read an article about that today, which I was thankful affirmed exactly what our instincts were. The state has put out a surveillance testing program that they are asking all schools to participate in. Our health folks internally, when they looked at the process, they said this doesn't quite feel right yet. So we want to stand on the sideline for a little while and let this sort out. What we're seeing is the districts that signed up for the first round of testing. The earliest I've heard that anyone's going to be able to get started is the end of September. Most of those districts are being told it will be mid-October before they can get after it. We are poised to jump into the queue to start getting trained and getting ready, and our hope is that all the glitches will have been worked out with the systems between the process of actually doing it in the buildings and the vendor that provides, the collection and the testing and the return of the data, etc. So more to come on that as that develops. I also want to share with you that if I were to issue a best guess, my best guess is that the Biden vaccine mandate may land in schools in Vermont in some capacity. You know, if any of you were following that announcement, there was this interesting little comment about employers of more than 100 employees, which would include us and which would include many school districts in Vermont. How that connects to the actual status of employment in Vermont and whether that would apply to us or not, I know is still being discussed by people above our pay grades. But I would not be shocked to see that land in schools. And if that does happen, we will be ready to sort that out and figure that out and whatever is necessary to comply with the law. Final piece I want to share with you, we are fortunate to not have this issue as of right now, but I am hearing reports from colleagues in neighboring districts about teachers and administrators primarily who are walking away from their positions right now for two primary reasons: stress related to the job in the current environment that we all live in, and COVID dynamic concerns. Again, this is not something that has approached us yet. This is not something that I have heard is occurring or will occur here necessarily, but it's real with our neighbors. So I just want you to be aware of that. You know, in the end, no matter how we all feel about different things, we are still human beings, and human beings navigate the stresses of what we do in different ways. So we're seeing that play out in different ways with different folks. So our eyes are on that, kind of watching and trying to take care of our people. But I want you to be aware of that, just as something to also be on the lookout. Comments and questions on COVID update? Thank you very much.
Thanks, Dave. All right, we're going to take a 5-minute recess right now just to see what you need to do to be able to focus on the rest of the meeting. I know it's a long one, but I think we need a little break. So 8:37 now. At 8:42, we will be back on. Sorry, but we need to say that. No, you don't. We're starting up again. Really quick.
What are we discussing now? It's important.
Do this tonight in terms of a presentation for you regarding our board district goals. I'm joined tonight for the process by Dan Betts from Wallingford, by Jody Stewart-Ruck, our Director of Curriculum Instruction and Equity, by Deborah Gardner-Bosch, who leads our coaching and intervention team. Coral Stone is going to be part of the presentation, who's our Director of Student Services, and Brian Hill, who you know as our Assistant Superintendent. So we'll be bouncing back and forth through this information just to try to give you an orientation. The real purpose of this tonight is to update you on current status with the current, but it'll be a review and kind of update for those of you who are involved. In the fall of 2018, we engaged in a process, and when I say we, that process was the school board.
David?
Yes.
Any chance you could quickly share these with us? So a couple of us who have computers.
Yeah, Brian could potentially do that as I'm speaking, right?
I forgot my glasses in my car because of my mask, and I'm like, I can't see it.
Don't worry, we'll cover everything.
All right.
Fall of 2018 and into early 2019, the board began working with a strategic planning consultant to start a strategic planning process. The purpose of that was to identify some mission and vision components for the district and to eventually land on some board goals that could be used for a number of things: to assess progress of the district, to assess things that were important to the board in terms of priorities, to figure out measures by which we would monitor student progress, and to use all that for good conversations at the board level. That took a lot of time, took a lot of just kind of taking the time to drill down on things the way that the board felt good about them. What the board landed on was a statement of who we are, and the board landed on, we are a proud public school community, preparing all students for the opportunities and challenges life presents. That led to a what do we value statement. What we value, what the board came up with, was we value quality and outcomes matter. We value opportunities for all. We value support when it is needed. We value responsible, kind, and engaged citizenship. I suspect that we could come up with all kinds of different words to say different things, but with those different words, I think that those concepts, I suspect that most of you as board members would probably still say, yeah, those are things that are important, those are things that we value. There were some foundational expectations for these goals in terms of how we would update and how we would report to you on these. And what you'll see kind of throughout this is recommendations for consideration for refinement. Len and I were having a conversation just on the side during the break, and I would share with you that I absolutely agree with Len's comments from earlier. First, we were joking about how sometimes when you look at the agenda, your eyes cross, and it's hard to make out, like, which one says discussion and which one says discussion and action. But also that any change.
Some high school-based programs, specifically at Shrewsbury and at Tyndall. The idea was that we would have kind of semester away programs where up to 15 students could spend their time at Shrewsbury doing sustainability and gardening and sustainability engineering work, and kiddos at Tyndall could have a true wilderness-based semester. However, there's been a variety of barriers in our way around this. Those barriers have included COVID, space, the ability to house those high schoolers in those campuses, transportation, and all of those things have kind of kept us from the idea of moving forward with that plan. So one of the questions we have for the board is, what do you think is the reasonable next step? Should we delete the high school program at those two campus ideas? Maybe relook at it as something that happens just at Mill River around those ideas? What makes the most sense given this idea that so many things are great ideas, but we really need to hone down to which are the most project-based learning, would have transportation over to Clarendon. Now again, the reality of public education is barriers. A specific barrier to that is our transportation crisis and the amount of bus drivers that we have. Another barrier to that we found was how to get kids to each one of the programs on time. So if a student got picked up from Tinmouth when Tinmouth was starting, they would conceivably miss an hour of the school day, and how do we mitigate that? We have found through practice that students, or would you like to amend it or keep it as is? Yeah, this is Tony.
No, this is Brian, right? Brian? Nope.
Actually, no, I think it's still Jody, but I can jump in. I don't mind. Sorry about that.
So, question about this. We're going to start talking about our Star 360 scores. I know that's something folks have been asking for and wanting to see and wanting to know how things are going. Give a little tiny bit of context before we see those scores. The spring when the pandemic hit, we did not all do our spring 360 testing. We did have pockets of educators who were comfortable doing it remotely. We got some feedback from Star 360, the service provider, about how to do that in a reasonable way, but we did not have enough information to use that information. So when you do see these scores come up, just keep that in mind that there's a missing spring piece that we don't have, and there's a reason for that. The question to think about as the board looks at these scores, some scores go up, some scores go down. But the big question is, what's the target that we should be aiming for? What makes sense? What number matters for our students? 85, 80, 90? I think we all would probably agree that our students being somewhat proficient in math, reading, literacy, grammar, writing, those things measured by these assessments, those are important things for students to graduate high school with. But how do we set that number that we know we're doing incredibly well by our students if we hit this number? So that's really the question to think about, I think, as you head into the retreat. So Jody's going to start talking about the reading ELA scores first.
Yes, so here are the percentages for the amount of students in each school reaching proficient or higher on the STAR 360 reading assessment for each one of these school years. Now the STAR 360 is what we call like an interim assessment. So it is given multiple times throughout the year, and it is one of the pieces of data that we use as benchmarks to watch students' progress. The STAR 360 printouts give us a lot of data about which skills kids are higher in and which skills they might need more work on. And so this is, things have definitely affected some of the scores. Our overall district average for spring of 2021 was 52%. So in a minute, Deborah Gardner-Bosch is going to talk a little bit about one of the programs that we have in place to address this need. One of the questions for the board is thinking as you work on the board goals about what we call a SMART goal. So it should be measurable, it should also be achievable. So thinking, we definitely want to and know we need to improve? What is a reasonable amount of improvement that you believe we can do in 1 year, or 2 years, or 3 years? Thinking about the data for the last 3 years and how things have gone.
So what grades are included in spring of 18, like in CES, and spring of 19? Are those the same students?
Yeah, so it's the same grade level, so.
No, but if you tested sixth grade in 2018, is the next one the seventh grade?
It's not cohorts,
No,
no.
it's not.
That's what I'm asking.
It's the school, the whole school.
Okay.
Just a clarification, really. So when we, doesn't matter which one you want to look at, that CES 59% are proficient, is that what that?
Yes,
Okay.
proficient. So these scores do not account for kids who are almost there versus kids who are significantly behind.
So it's just
It's just
students who are proficient?
who met our target goal.
Yeah, so do we know who, I think proficiency is like a 1 and almost something out, 2, 3, 4 kind of thing.
Yes.
Are those shared with us also?
So if you wanted us to pull the data on how many 1s, 2s, 3s,
Right.
and 4s we have.
Hi, I am Deborah Gardner-Bosch, and I know there are a few new board members who weren't here a few years ago. We did some presentations about multi-tiered systems of support and the 3 tiers and 5 layers of support in the system. So anyway, sometimes the terminology can be a little confusing, but basically tier 2 supports have 3 characteristics. They're using evidence-based kinds of curriculums. It's usually done in smaller group, and it involves a specific intervention for a bit of time. In 2017, we hired 3 ELA interventionists that were sharing between all of the elementary schools. And then in 2017, we were able to add a part-time math interventionist that the next year then was full-time. And this year, we were able to add a 4th ELA interventionist. So one of the ways that we try to really target is that we spend a lot of time looking at the data that we have. So this is actually just one line from an end-of-year report that we did for every child that was in intervention in the elementary schools. And we target K2, although this year we are targeting K3 because of the disruptions to second graders' education. And then as space and time allow, students further up in the grades also. So we're looking at the length of the intervention. You can see that we would have like a beginning score and an ending score and STAR 360. And we're also looking at what we have up there as F and P, which is Fontes and Canal, at reading level scores. And then we're tracking, how much progress is made. One of the things we started having to track carefully was absences. So we found for kids who were not making a year or more progress, almost always they had, here you can see there's 25 absences, 20 absences. So they're really getting an interruption in the service. But for the kids that were marking green there, they need more than a year and a half, some of them need more than 2 years of a jump during that however many months that you're seeing there. So having really measurable kinds of goals, this is all part of our EST process, educational support team process, and this is the kind of data that we're using for that.
So something interesting that Deborah mentioned that I'll talk a little bit about, a year's worth of growth. The expectation is that every student makes a year's worth of growth. If you have a student in kindergarten that may be struggling, we get them plugged into intervention, we get them back on track, catch them early and try and help them. If they make that year's worth of growth every year, our numbers are fantastic. Our intervention program is 4 years old?
This is
year
starting our
5?
5th year.
Yeah, this is year 5 of intervention. So we had a lot of years where I think unfortunately we were not getting students some of those early interventions, and when we had phenomenal teachers getting a year's worth of growth, that kid went from being a little behind to being a little behind, being a little behind. Because every year they're expected to make growth. And it's a challenging problem when you get a student who has gone 5 or 6 years and has not gotten support to get back on grade level. That phenomenal teacher can still do that year's worth of growth, most likely. But how do you get 2, 3, 4 years worth of growth? The great thing Deborah was saying is intervention is able to start getting those kids more than a year's worth of growth sometime, which is phenomenal. BJ?
I was wondering, does STAR 360 offer targeted growth?
There are growth measures that we can look at. And that might be a great conversation for the board retreat, because the data that we have is based on what the board goal is looking at. The board goal is looking at proficiency rate. If we were talking about growth rate, we would be showing you very different numbers. Because, so Clarendon, for example, 56% of Clarendon students that were assessed spring of 2021 were proficient. You may have had 80% of kids who made expected growth. But those kids who were behind and made expected growth stayed behind because they only made 1 year's worth of expected growth. So I think that's a very important question for the board to be considering. Do we expect all our kids to be proficient, or do we expect them to be making growth every year? If they're making growth every year, we know that some good things are happening. Do we need to catch up some of those students and make more than a year's worth of growth? Absolutely. But looking at that number by itself might not give you as much information as if you looked at that number and growth numbers, if that makes sense. Does that help you?
It does. For the retreat, could you share with us some examples of data you provide from STAR 360?
Yes, I can get some
So we
things
can
together
get
to
some
say,
ideas of what-
here's some things you could look at in addition, or
Okay.
instead of, this measure, if that makes sense. Thank you. Another thing to think about is special ed students. We typically have about a 13% of our students are special education students. They may be working on modified goals, but when they get to this assessment, they're not receiving accommodations, modifications on this assessment. Because we don't need this information. Let me think of a reasonable way to put this, and Coral, jump in, because I know it matters a lot for you. We need to know what the student can do without support, so we can see if we're helping them. If we see what they're doing with support, it's hard to say that we're helping them to actually grow themselves. Maybe we're helping them take the test too much, if that makes sense. This is a measure we really need to see what the student can do on their own. And because of that, our special education students typically are almost never proficient on our STAR 360. If they were, without support, all of a sudden we'd be going into an IEP meeting and we'd be saying the student doesn't need services, because here they are taking the assessment, they're proficient. So that's an interesting number to think about, because if we said 90% proficiency is the goal, we've got 14% of special education students that we want that year's worth of growth, but we may never see them on grade level. They can learn, but high expectations for them might look differently than high expectations for other students, if that makes sense. Maria, a question for me?
Kind of. I'm just wondering where this data is most useful.
Yep.
Like, is it most, because I see it as a measure of our schools, compared to other schools, it isn't necessarily as useful as it is as a information for teachers and educators to know who to target.
The most powerful use of these scores is the teacher in the classroom.
Right.
I think I've had that in some of my board reports if you go back 4 years. That's the message that we always have had as long as I've been around the admin team. Our teachers do the most important work. What I say has far less impact on our students' educations than our amazing teachers and the work that they do. When their students take these scores and they get a printout showing how they're doing in a lot of different areas, not one number to represent an entire school, that educator working with that student and setting goals and trying to help them in the areas that they're weak in, that's the most important work we can be engaged in. Johnny is struggling conjugating verbs, but Johnny's doing great reading. Then let's focus on more conjugation, not more reading for Johnny. So that classroom teacher knowing exactly what each student needs, that's why this thing is huge and incredible. And why we try to do it 3 times a year. So you can see if you're making progress. Is Johnny getting better? Because we targeted some support for him.
So the difficult thing about teachers is the time to give to reading these things. There's so many professional development meetings. There's so many meetings, or this, that, and the other. There's no time. So is there a conscious effort to give teachers time to work on organizing their thoughts behind these things?
So one thing that Jody was talking about was professional learning communities that are focused on how are your kids doing? How can you get better at interpreting data? I think you said the words data literacy, Jody. We are pretty sure from getting feedback from teachers that they don't have enough time to do some of this work. Sometimes they're not comfortable doing the work because they didn't have a data literacy class in their teacher prep program. And they come in the door and they're trying to figure out how to manage their classroom so their students all get along with each other first, so the students all feel taken care of, and they're comfortable in a classroom enough that they can actually engage in what the teacher's trying to teach them. Oh yeah, then what do I do with all these test scores? That I think comes very late, speaking from my experience as an educator, and other educators on the board jump in. My first year teaching, I was not a great teacher. I had no experience and I was figuring a lot out as I was going along. Test scores and assessments and what to do with those and how to help my students came a lot later in my career as an educator, because the first things that I had to figure out on the ground that mattered more, knowing how to read test scores and interpret them and change my practice to better educate my students, didn't get my kids to get along the first day of school. So that came way later. And I think that's something, an area that we are trying to make an effort to better address, because I think we have not addressed data literacy enough in the past. I think that's been something we haven't focused on, and it needs to be a focus. The leadership team, right before pandemic, we were doing a bunch of work together on data literacy before we started engaging our teachers. Because if we don't know how to do it, if we don't know how to interpret the scores, how do we expect our teachers to?
Here's 2 more quick questions.
Yeah.
Are the scores sent home to the parents with a simplified, not an education speak thing, with a simplified version? How do I read this score? Because some people say, oh, he's in the 81st percentile.
What does percentile mean?
And they thought he was scoring 81.
Yeah. What does percentile mean?
And then secondly, is an effort made to actually contact a parent with a low scoring grade?
I'd say the first question, yes. The expectation is that scores are sent home. Absolutely.
And who sends them?
Who sends them? The school sends them. Okay. And a lot of schools are smaller schools, maybe all of our elementaries. And principals, you can chime in if you're still here. Dan, former principal Jody. Lots of times the parent conferences in October line up really well. And teachers will meet with the parents and go over some of those things with them, the test scores included. High school, they tend to go in the mail because I think turnout at parent-teacher conferences is a little lower than at the elementary level. What I used to do with my students, I'd go over it with the parents that came in, the ones that didn't, I'd send information home. Question 2, do we notify parents when their students score really low on STAR? No, I don't think we have a consistent practice of doing that. Part of that is because this is one thing we do. Teachers have, by the time they're assessing a couple of weeks into school, and by the time that they would probably reach out to parents, I think they have far more information at their hands, and they know whether a score is problematic or not. So, for example, a special education student might score 5th percentile. Well, we already have IEP meetings, and those parents are pretty involved in how their students are doing, and that communication, I hope, is happening before a test score would even need to go home. So that test score is not necessarily the most important thing that the one thing we communicate. If a student's scoring poorly on the assessment, but doing really well in class, I as a former educator, I wouldn't have called parents. I would have talked to the student and said, hey, what happened yesterday? I saw your scores from last year. I see what you've been doing in my classroom. What happened? Why does your score not line up with what I've already seen? So it's not a practice that if a student scores poorly that we all automatically pick up the phone and call caregivers, if that makes sense. And I think it's because we have a lot of data points, and we don't call home necessarily just because one of them looks poorly. Does that help?
It does and it doesn't.
Yeah.
Because at some point, maybe a student just starts falling down.
Totally.
And parents think everything's going along fine. And then at the end of the year, or late in the first.
Then they
you
get
find
the
out-
report card and nobody's
Right.
happy.
Right, and I didn't understand how to read the scores. Why didn't somebody talk with me?
Now, and Tyler's not here, but I'm pretty confident in this. Somebody jump in if this is not the case. The expectation of teachers at the high school, 7-12 actually, middle high, if a student's grade is slipping below proficient in the class, parent contact is one of the things you have to do. So it is going to be a requirement, and that may be a shift from the past. But this year, that's an expectation that teachers are going to be asked to follow. If a report card's going to go home with a 2 on it, you need to have spoken with the parent. And I think that's important, because getting to the report card, and cut me off, Dave, because I'm talking a heck of a lot.
No surprises, no surprises. And it's our expectation that teachers at all levels in all content areas, even if they're not assessing students in these specific areas, are tuned into how their students are performing and are communicating with families so that there are no surprises. If there are gaps in that regard, those are gaps that our schools need to address, and we need to be aware of them. So anybody that hears me saying these words, we mean that.
And there are gaps. There are times when the report card goes home and the parents, it came out of the blue. I used to tell my middle schoolers there are 2 types of surprises, good ones, bad ones. Poor grade on the report card, and that's the first time you've ever heard of it, that's a bad surprise. And we have a problem. I'm sure it's happened. I'm sure it has. Our expectation is that it doesn't. And we need to know when it's not, so that we can work together to fix it.
We've got Dan up next.
Gosh, these test scores, yeah. So 2 things about these test scores that I think are important. Some of these look poor because they went down a lot. Some of these look like they went up a lot. And when that happens, we really want to look at these and think about, well, why did that happen? We want to celebrate the successes, but we also want to know what the heck happened so that we can do it somewhere else. If it's working, could it work somewhere else? Maybe, maybe not. Dan is also going to share with us those opportunities when we see something that didn't turn out the way we expected. We want to look at that too. We want to do that post-mortem. Why did it happen? How can we avoid that in the future? What could we have done differently? So Dan, if you want to talk about the Wallingford numbers there a little bit.
Yeah. So great questions. My brain is just spinning right now, and obviously Brian did an excellent job answering those. But I kind of want to front load the conversation before diving into the data. STAR data is not summative data, and what summative means is it's like the final mark, and our job is done. We hope that that's not even the case when we get CST SBAT results. I went back a few years there. But with the STAR 360 data, it certainly is not summative. It is formative, which means it is to inform our instruction and where we need to support our students. And so one thing that I emphasize with my staff, and even we had a meeting today talking even more about this, as a follow-up from our Welcome Back meetings where we looked at this data, the data doesn't lie. It is what it is. And there can be a plethora of reasons why or factors that play into these results. And so we need to try to look at all of those, but then not feel defeated if we feel beat up looking at a score like ours, going from 18, 19 to 21, all of a sudden there's this drop. That's kind of breathtaking, not in a good sense. And so as a staff, we had the conversation, what are the possibilities that are the whys behind why we're looking at this data? And obviously COVID was one of the first ones. But you look at some of the other sites and you think, well, it's not like they didn't experience any COVID drama. But some other things that we talked about just as a Wallingford dynamic, there hasn't been a whole lot of continuity with staffing. So when we have a certain grade level that comes through and in 1 year there's 3 teachers, I know one of the purposes behind looping, which Fred talked about earlier this evening, is having a second grade teacher teach second graders, and then the next year they loop up and follow those second graders into third grade. That teacher knows everything there is to know about those kids academically, and they just pick up right where they left off. And there's no guessing game, there's no learning process, no get to know you, it's just they take off running. Well, when you have a group of students that have 3 teachers in 1 year, the continuity doesn't exist. So there's a shock in the system. And we do have new staff as well. And so the thing that I'm excited about is how awesome our new staff is and how positive and supported they are in the relationships they've already built with kids. And we know that that's what's got to happen first in order for our kids to learn. But a couple of things to answer your question, take a couple steps further than what Brian said. I had conversations with parents last year and they wanted to see the STAR data, and I felt like it was more of they wanted to see their kids' grade, but it wasn't. It's where are they at and where do we need to bring them. And so we actually sent results, the test results home, took it a step further. Instead of showing them proficiency rate like this, we gave them like the PDD, the zone of proximal development. So they got a printout that showed the learning targets where their child is ready to learn next. Not what they already know. It's here's something that you could take with you over the summer and just start. I mean, you could Google this stuff and come up with activities. You could probably make up some on the fly on your own and work in these areas where your kid is ready to jump into this next next standard or learning target. And so we're going to be sending those home every single time that we assess this year with the STAR 360 data. And hoping that the message is not, oh, this is what your kid is doing, this is just where they're at, and there's no good that can come from it, or something terrible like that. It's, no, this is where they scored, and we're doing something about it. This is how you can help from home, and this is what we're doing from a school standpoint. We have been very lucky in the way that our schedule worked out for a master's schedule. So another answer to your question. I've designed it and brought back really what we had a couple of years ago, double preps for learning pods. So I've got like the pre-K, they're a pod. The K1-2, they're a pod. The 3-4 grid, they're a pod. 5-6, they're a pod. And those teachers share double preps. So they have an hour and 20 minutes once a week, in addition to their other preps that they have every other day.
And that's that time Bruce is talking about.
Yeah.
Setting that time aside is huge.
So they have an hour, 20 minutes once a week in the school day where the specials take their class for 2 back-to-back specials. And those 2 teachers are focusing on student learning. Where are they at? Where do we want them to be? How are we going to get them there? What about the kids that aren't making it? What about the kids that are already there? What are we going to do? And so they're answering these basic PLC questions, professional learning community questions that we know help drive instruction to help identify where the students' needs are and to help improve, to bring them up to proficiency. So we've also done some crazy scheduling, and today we were even clarifying it and kind of shoring up a little bit more. But in these PLCs, we have them broken down throughout the month. So like the first and third week of the month, the teachers meet in their PLCs during the school day, and their focus is on math. So at least 2 of those meetings within that month is just straight math. And that is our focus. Look at the data, where should our focus be? We identified that at the end of last year during our continuous improvement plan, when the team got together. I brought it back to staff, they agreed, and so we've got a hyper focus on math. And so we have created a template that is going to drive those meetings that has a focus on math, what the strategy is going to be, and there'll be a certain amount of time that goes, and they're going to create a goal, so like a SMART goal, specific, measurable, attainable. Anyway, so as they give like a pre-test, they identify where their class is proficiency-wise. They're going to work on specific strategies to help bring that area up, and then they're going to do a post-test, and they will measure how many of the students made growth, to what extent, and how many met proficiency or not. And then it's not over yet, right? Because the learning doesn't stop. So there's going to be some students who blew it out of the park, and there's going to be still those that don't. And that's not necessarily a student issue. Sometimes that could be a teacher issue, and that's hard to swallow sometimes. But taking time, having these meetings and meeting week after week, and that building of trust, that we're able to have open conversations of, I wonder why my students didn't all meet proficiency on this. What is it that you did that you're getting these results? And hopefully those conversations start to become more real. And after they finish a post-test, they can identify another strategy to help reteach those students who didn't quite meet the mark. So that's going to be our main focus. And within that is the RTI, the response to intervention. We have the EST process that was talked about a little bit earlier. And that is another week that's built into their collaboration time, is just working on students who are a part of the EST, who already have a plan, or who are going in that direction. And so they're going to be looking at specific interventions based on kids' needs. Are those interventions working? If not, what else? And so one week out of that month is we have it planned so that our interventionists, our psychologists, whoever is needed for each of those students' needs who are in the EST process will come into that meeting, work with those teachers to find out what resources we can possibly give them to help them out. And then that is kind of like a pre-EST meeting, so that when we meet the following week with parents, we can let them know, and this of course is not the first time the parents have this conversation, so if there's an area of concern, that's all automatically communicated just to parents right away. And we get feedback from a referral form that gathers some information that sometimes is important for us to know as educators, right? And so as we're going through that process as a staff, then we already have the answers of what's next. And so when we meet with that parent, we can let them know, hey, this is what we've done, this didn't work, this did work, this is still an area we've identified as a significant need, and so we're going to provide this additional support. And it's going to be a reading intervention. It's going to happen 3 days a week for 30 minutes a day. And they'll be pulled out and just intensive instruction support. That was a lot. I might have more.
I might chime in and give the 2 minutes, because I think an interesting piece here. I think you're going to hear, thank you, Dan. Yep. You're going to hear, I hope you took away from that Dan has been thinking a lot about this, and that today he was engaging with staff in a faculty meeting about this, and that they've thought through it a lot at Wallingford. Maureen is on the other end of this data, and we go, gosh, what was going on there? So Maureen prepared something for me to share, and I'm going to go through this. I'm not going to read it word for word. DJ.
Before you do that, I got a quick question.
Yep.
We're looking at spring data.
Yes.
We're looking at percentages who are proficient.
Yes.
Is that taking into account that it's the first test of the year? Like, am I expecting lower percentages in the spring,
actually,
and higher at the fall?
I'd say the opposite. You're expecting hopefully a little higher in the spring. And there you
say a student has a raw score of 1,000 in the fall and is proficient, and they have a raw score of 1,000 in the spring, they may not be proficient anymore. Fall to spring, there's expected growth. So the spring numbers should be our better numbers. Does that help? You
That sounds backwards if I was thinking
That's
about
what I'm
growth.
thinking.
I was thinking that.
Think about the school year though.
Yeah.
Fall to spring.
Fall, the kids just got here.
Oh,
How are they?
I'm backwards. I'm backwards.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just got these kids, I don't know them. Where are they? Okay, now I do a lot of work. Spring, I hope they
Spring's
make
the end of the
progress.
year.
Yes.
Okay.
No, great clarification. Great.
Okay.
I love it.
But that is something to think about, that, so the fall numbers will be much lower.
Because seriously, Brian, I was, we're
Yeah.
sitting here going, what?
No, stop me, ask questions. Absolutely. And we do typically see a little bit of a dip in the fall, almost like an artificial, because you may make a little progress, spring looks okay, then it dips in the fall, and then it kind of works back up, dips again. Because the summer regression, they say, that's the fancy way of saying, kids are out of practice, because they didn't practice a lot of the summer. So I think you'll find some parallels between what Dan said they're planning and what Maureen said worked. She shares that there's no silver bullet. You don't think that Timnit has this figured out. But there are different things that they have done that she believes that all those things added together have really supported growth in math at Timnit. She outlines teacher expertise as probably the most significant factor in that. Teachers have the greatest impact on their students. We believe that. There's a whole lot of research supporting that. Last year was the first year in a long time that they had a team of experienced teachers who had been at Timnit for several years. That continuity of staffing, which was maybe problematic at Wallingford. She also mentions that they all attended professional development together. And it was math professional development. So you had this team of experienced folks who had worked together for a while, all went to the same professional development on math. So that's important. That expertise that they were gaining in that teamwork of working on it together, not isolated, but to be able to say, hey, we just learned this. I tried it, it didn't work. You tried it, it did work. Whoa, what did you do a little differently? That collaboration is great, and Dan's building that time in. Direct instruction time matters. Len, you know this, time with kids matter. Time away from kids better be gosh darn worth it. It better be making our teachers better so that when they are with kids, they can do that important work. All but one student was in person last year. Wallingford had remote kids. Clarendon had remote kids. Shrewsbury maybe had one. Some. And there's a factor that Dan didn't mention, but I think is worth noting. And actually, Timnit had some after-school tutoring that was going 3 days a week last year as well. Fred mentioned they're doing that in Clarendon this year. So there are some parallels of, we saw these things working, we're going to try and do more of them. She talks about specials scheduled back-to-back, that double specials to give teachers time that exactly Dan said he's going to try doing. And they use that time to have careful analysis of test data and directing their instruction and remediation based on looking at that data. So exactly what Dan was talking about. We did plan that. We did. Maureen just gave this to me, and she did not collaborate with me on this. And actually, we added math intervention a little bit 2 years ago, and we grew that math intervention last year. One person for the whole entire district. And Maureen mentions that our math intervention person coming up to Timnit, and that being a piece that supported the work there as well. And then she had noticed, and her teachers had noticed, that some of the students taking this assessment flew through it. Click, I'm done. So they had conversations with those students around, is that really a reflection of where you are and what you can do? Oh, it's not. Well, we need to know where you are. We can't help you. Because looking at this test score, we go, oh gosh, we got to throw you in remediation. Do you want to do that? Oh no. Well, let's retake the test. Show us what you know. And if you know it, we'll move on to the next thing. So some students did retake the test. And they did better when they retook it because they took it seriously. and it was a more accurate reflection of what they knew. So that I think was important too. The last thing she notes is, because our student population is small, test results are volatile. One class with an inexperienced teacher at Tinmouth is a huge percentage of their population, and that can significantly impact percentages. On the other end, if you have a bunch of experienced folks, it can tip it the other way a lot more quickly than at another school. So she felt like that was important to mention there. Finally, relationships with families, child-centeredness, and the ability to differentiate are a few of the less transparent and measurable factors that play into success for test scores as well. So a lot of things came together at Tinmouth with a certain group of students. We're trying some of those things elsewhere, and we're hoping those work, but we know that you can't just transplant what Maureen and her staff did and do it exactly the same way somewhere else. But we're exploring what worked, and we're trying to keep going from that. Click. Get me to walk away from the mic. Oh no, that was.
No, it's still you, buddy. That's our click.
I will stay all night and I will talk to you about this stuff because I care about it and I care about our kids. And this is how we know if we're making a difference or not. So, but seriously, stop me. If I'm boring you and you want me to move on, just say next. The last time we looked at SBAC scores, I believe it was in this room, a little different arrangement. It was 2 falls ago because we had a COVID fall and there were no SBAC results to look at. We were talking about this in the fall before we knew a pandemic was looming in the spring. And my last slide, the last thought that I shared with folks was, we have work to do. We knew that then. We have more work to do now because we just got through a pandemic. And we know that. I share with you really big picture data, anticipating maybe VJ's question about breaking this down more. About 10 days ago, the state said, do not publicly use results yet. We were able to send individual score sheets home over the summer. Those sheets that explain, what does this mean? What is a percentile? Really, how is my kid doing? What's that? How do I interpret that number? We send those home over the summer. We had the okay to do that, but the state level data has not landed in a way that it's official. So I give you really big picture just so you can get a sense of it. Some of the students that go into that might be incorrectly associated with Mill River. The state is still figuring out based on census data. Oh, we thought that was your student because they started the year with you. Oh, but they transferred halfway through the year, they actually tested here. So they haven't sorted through all that, and that's why test scores might shift just barely. And that's why I only show you big picture, because it won't shift much. But know that this is not necessarily 100% nailed down. You'll see the star is the blue line, the SBAC, the Smarter Balanced Assessment Consortium, that is our big state testing one, that's the red line. Why are they far apart? Because the SBAC and STAR 360 have a different cutoff for proficiency. They don't agree on what a kid has to do to be proficient. So it's a little easier to be proficient on STAR than it is to be on Smarter Balanced. Think about Smarter Balanced as the teacher that's really a stickler and expects a little bit more from you than STAR 360. So that's why they're apart. But the interesting thing I think is they tend to follow a similar trend. STAR dips a little bit. But our SBAC, which is the harder one, and the one that our students sit for far longer, 20 minutes on a STAR test versus hours on the SBAC. The final writing piece of the SBAC, students have to read several pieces of reading we're talking about. Students have to read several pieces of literature, and they have to write an argument. One big blank spot for them to write an argument. And that's challenging. STAR does not make you do that. STAR, you answer some questions, you do some work, you get to the end, they'll tell you how you've done. The fact that our SBAC scores did not significantly drop, I think is interesting. There was a lot of discussion nationwide around, during the pandemic, reading scores were not affected quite as much as math scores. Some interesting interpretations like, well, our kids still read stuff. You know, maybe it was comic books. maybe it was a chat room online, maybe it was texting their friends, but they were engaging in reading and writing somehow. Math? I don't know how many kids, and I don't know, kids at homeschool age, were they doing math for fun during the pandemic? No. But were they talking and writing? And
I'm not a good example. I learned how to use a group, how to solve Rubik's Cube in 2 minutes.
Okay, so exceptions, but I think that's an interesting, and we can click the math if thank you. Maybe.
Here we go. Got it. Sorry about that.
Sorry. Math, interestingly, we saw math dip in both. And that tracks with what we've seen in nationwide data, that the math was affected a little bit more than the reading. Who knows why, but it kind of makes sense that pandemic education didn't work quite as well. But math is the thing that mattered a lot more for our kids to get, and they got some reading outside of pandemic education. Interesting that they do follow the same trend, big picture. So it seems reasonable that our STAR scores are a fair predictor for how our students are doing. So that SBAC happens once a year. Well, gosh, it's hard to do much when you only get information once a year. How do you make a meaningful change? It's too late. Our STAR scores in the spring, if we know where our kids are in the spring, we can make a pretty good guess how they're going to do on the SBAC at the end of the year. So I think it's worth seeing those next to each other and seeing how those track. Our kids are pretty darn resilient, which is cool, but we do have work to do.
Right?
Yep.
You know, for the board, especially for our newer board members, I'm going to share a piece of information with you that you may not have heard. As a school board, you have 3 primary responsibilities according to statute.
I know there's a lot later.
One is establish policies and monitor them. The other is establish a budget and monitor that. And the third is hire a superintendent and monitor that superintendent's performance and make decisions accordingly. The work you're seeing, the work that goes on in our schools, the goals that you set kind of fit into that. Can fit into several of those, right? Can fit into the budgetary context, but also can fit into your monitoring of the superintendent. I share that with you because I hope you've seen already, we're only halfway through this bad boy, by the way. I hope you've seen already that even when the board in its work is distracted or preoccupied with specifics that go into your work, there are people in these schools that are working their tails off to serve our kids. There are people making decisions each and every day based on good information and good data to serve our kids and help our kids to progress. So it's really, really important that we never lose sight of that. I get to talk about more high school-based information with you right now. So one of our goals is about the PSAT. Let me be clear, not the SAT, but the PSAT, which is kind of a preliminary version of that. We set a goal that our 11th grade students would reach for a composite score of 1,115, which was a really lofty composite score. That's 10% higher than the national average when we formulated these goals. You can see a little bit of background on how those averages nationally, Vermont and Mill River, have played out across recent years. And the not available, they're just complex with these nationally normed tests. Sometimes it's hard to get a good solid average, so that's why you have some NAs there. A couple things I want to point out to you about this data. We all know you can slice and dice data any way you want to. There are some inherent truths in this that I think are worth knowing. One of those inherent truths that's worth looking at is the US average on the PSAT has been declining across the past 3 school years. The Vermont average declined at least across 2 years. We don't know the Vermont average as of yet for 2021. You can see the Mill River average had a bump up and then has had has had a decline down in the recent 3 years. Another key truth in this, however, is a really important one not to lose track of. Nationally, the students that take the PSAT tend to be 10th or 11th graders, and they are students who view themselves as college bound. The PSAT is an opt-in test where students choose and seek out the opportunity to take it. So there's a specific cohort of students that these scores are representing. The same applies for these scores, for the Vermont average. Here in Mill River, we made a decision that we wanted to test all of our students in the 10th and 11th grade on the PSAT. Every student. That way they have multiple opportunities at it. You may see a student who's in 10th grade that didn't think that they had plans to go into higher education after they were done with high school. And PSAT might point them in a direction. Career planning and that type of thing is also part of that process. So it can open some doors for students. So when we share these Mill River numbers, it's important for you to understand that that is testing our 11th graders specifically, and that's every student in the school, as opposed to self-selected students who perceive themselves as college bound. When you apply that lens, those numbers say a slightly different thing. There are still discrepancies. We want that number to be higher, but it's important to just acknowledge what goes into that number. Yes, Len?
Wouldn't it also, I mean, when you talk about testing all 10th and 11th grade students, I think particularly in math, 10th graders may not be at the level that the 11th graders are at in math, so obviously their scores are going to be worse, which when you combine them, will impact what the score looks like.
Yeah, no question. All I can share is a personal example. My youngest son, as I've looked at his experience with the SAT and the verbal and reading scores, as he's taken the SAT multiple times, have stayed relatively stable. He's improved because the more you take that test, the more familiar with you become. But the math scores climb every time, like you just said, because they've actually been exposed to content that they were not exposed to from a prior assessment. So yeah, great point. Any other questions on that slide before I go on? All right, one other piece, and this is another really interesting one that I candidly don't quite know where I would recommend we land on this. One of our goals is around flexible pathways. So quick recap, Act 77 of 2013 established a number of things in the law. It established that public schools need to develop flexible pathways for students to achieve graduation. That means different options to get you there, essentially. Act 77 also, in the education quality standards that emerged from it, required us to develop proficiency-based graduation requirements. So, any of the previous few years when we started first hearing about proficiency-based graduation, where you experienced some resistance to it, where you saw teachers and students and families learning to get accustomed to it, that comes from the law. It comes from Act 77 that said that public schools had to make that move. In the flexible pathways realm, you can best describe that as other ways to gain experience. For example, AP classes, dual enrollment at colleges and universities, early college, which is a different program than dual enrollment, but involves taking college classes. Our students that attend the tech center at Stafford Tech Center, any tech education outside of school, internships, work studies. We have students participating in all kinds of different opportunities. When we track those numbers, we said that the target would be at least 60% with annual increasing participation. We made that number up. That number is not based on anything realistic. Our actual numbers, you can see, have been about that, 62, 56, and 66. But there's an interesting dynamic that's worth paying attention to, and I'm not saying that it's a dynamic that should cause us to make decisions one way or the other, but it's worth paying attention to when we have students attend Stafford, dual enrollment at Castleton, for example, or early college, or participate in an internship, do something outside the school environment for credit. What that does is that removes students from the school environment. So if we're talking about Mr. Morton's English class, where Mr. Morton might have an average class size, can I ask you, what would you say your average class size was, just off the top?
Last year?
Yeah.
Maybe 15.
So average class size of 15. There's a reasonable possibility that we could say, if we didn't have students involved in these other opportunities, that class size might be 20, because they're elsewhere, so they're not here to take Bruce's class. Where that gets interesting and tricky is when the numbers get small. Like think about AP classes, for an example. There have been times where we're not able to run a specific AP course because we don't have enough students to populate that AP course. It's hard to justify a single teacher with 2 or 3 students in their classroom, right? It's hard to justify that expenditure of dollars. Those students may be getting that experience at Castleton, just not in an AP class here. So our students are having the opportunity but it affects what happens in the school, it affects the schedule, it affects teacher caseloads and courses. You know, there's a lot of kind of trickle down that goes with that. That's why I say, I don't know if this is the ideal number. This seems to be about the number, but we don't know what the ideal balance is to make sure that we can continue to offer the most diversified options we can for kids, but still not limit their options to do other things as well. There's a tricky balance that goes along with that.
David?
Yes?
Is there another measure we can look at that with? Another lens we can look at that to measure that?
Yeah, maybe. That's a conversation I'm really interested in. And I think that's a good board and administrative team kind of joint conversation to think about what that looks like. It'd be cool to figure that out. Another piece that's just worth looking at, graduation rates. You know, we've targeted graduation rate as one of the areas of focus that we have. You can see how graduation rates have trended in the U.S. and in Vermont and here at Mill River. You'll note at Mill River we did have a dip in the 18-19 year, but we did recover in 19-20. Really cool example for you from this past 2021 graduating class. Of the students that were eligible to graduate, that were enrolled in the class, everybody but 2 students graduated, walked across the stage and got a diploma. Those 2 students are involved in our Pathways program, which is connected to having special needs, and we provide services to them until they are into their early 20s. So every eligible student this year either graduated or continued in their program. And I would suggest, given our proficiency expectations, they did so with the highest standards that we've had in terms of what we require them to meet in order to say that they make graduation expectations. So positive data in that regard. Things are going well. Cool. Jody?
Can I take over?
Yeah.
So this statistic is about out-of-school suspension data. So we know if kids aren't in school, they cannot learn. And so something that's been a long-term goal of our district is to increase the use of restorative justice and restorative practices when we're dealing with negative student behaviors. Because we know that students do well if they can, and most negative behaviors come out of them trying to fill some sort of need, or from just not knowing something. So we believe in most cases, education, repairing the relationship with the person that they harm, and reflection does more to help our entire community and the student that took the negative action to do better next time. So as you can see, the number of days applied have significantly decreased in the last 3 years. Part of that, sure, was COVID, but we did prorate the 1 year. The next year we had socially distanced students. That did significantly decrease our events. And I will say that we have had 3 HHB investigations yet this year. 2 were substantiated, both were handled with appropriate restorative practices so far. We did have a meeting, all of the principals and myself and Brian met this summer, and we went through the Mill River handbook to look for where we could change language to be more restorative. And we did that all together and then took that back to respective schools and worked on that at the elementary level as well, and that was really meaningful for all of us. Again, we want to hold students accountable, but we want to make sure that we are understanding that students are still learning, and part of that learning is about behavior, and the ways that we want to help create them as our future neighbors is to help them to think about their actions, own things, and then do better the next time. Another piece of that social emotional goal is student attendance rates. As you can see, we've held pretty solid for the last few years. Last year was 93%. We do expect that to decrease a little bit this year because last year remote learning was an option. And so if a student didn't feel well or had other things going on, they could still access their learning remotely. That is not currently an option. So if a student needs to go out for quarantine, that does potentially affect that. But when doing board goals, just thinking about whether or not that 95% as a reasonable goal remains or not. Another piece of our social emotional goals is measured by the Youth Risk Behavior Survey. We do not have more updated data on that, again, because of COVID. We hope to have more updated data on that soon. But these anonymous surveys, the answers that students give us really helps us to see where potential holes are. So these are some specific.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Go.
Well, my question was, how did these four come to be? I mean, the youth risk behavior survey is more than 4 questions.
Absolutely. It's been a while since we created this goal. I believe we worked to pick out the ones that we thought most spoke to needs in our school community.
Well, I guess the last one, dealing with vaping, must have been hot at the time.
It was extremely hot at the time.
Yeah.
As we revisit, we may want to revisit.
Yeah, okay, that's.
Yep, and that's something for the board to think about, because there is a variety of questions having to do with a variety of concerns, behaviors, and wonders. So that was, as vaping technology was emerging, a significant concern. There has been major public health campaigns about that danger, and I think more kids have understood that. So the board may or may not want to choose another piece of the YRDS to address that goal.
Can we look at, do we have any copies of that youth risk behavior survey?
Of the actual questions?
Yeah.
Yeah, not in like a list format, but in a reporting format, yes, we can access those.
I was just thinking, if we're gonna look at including these, or some of them, then it would be helpful to be able to look
Yeah,
at.
and not to jump ahead too much, but one of our suggestions as we talk about this is we've contemplated, maybe some of the questions that we believe are the right questions to be keeping track of on a more updated basis, because 2019 data doesn't do much for us.
Right.
We should identify those, and we could maybe even have a local surveying that asks those same questions, so we could have more real-time data and be tracking that more accurately.
Thank you.
Deborah, are you up
Yes,
next?
we're going to pass it off, and then we're going to talk more about this.
Sorry, Deborah, I'm trying to click here. There we go.
All right, so one of the other things that I've been involved with over the years is the Interact Club, which is a service club. And so in 2019, I went with a group of students up to Montpelier, and we took a training called Getting to Why. That's put on by Up for Learning. So what happens every 2 years is that you get all of this data, but it doesn't have any real reflection in it about the whys kids might have made some of the choices, or do anything with what might be done to address it. It's just the raw data. So what Getting to Why was, it was a training to help kids do root cause analysis. And so some of you have been on the board for a while will remember that we had a data retreat where we had over 35 students who came, and they went through the data that we had, and then there was quite a process of 4 or 5 hours of really looking at the data, and then picking what they thought were the most important things to look at. So the way that Getting to Why does it, they have you also pick your strengths and go through really looking at what kinds of supports are available in the community and at the school. So what the kids picked as being their strengths was that only 3% of Mill River students had driven in a car after drinking alcohol, and that 82% of kids said that they had at least one teacher or other adult at school that they could talk with. Right? What they picked as their concerns were 27% of Mill River High School students felt sad or hopeless almost every day for 2 weeks in a row, and that went up actually to 38%. They had to do this with 2017 data. When we did it in 2019, we updated it when we did get the 2019 data. And you can see the other two they picked. One was 24% that increased to 38% that said someone had done sexual things to them they did not want. And then the 17% up to 23% in 2019 that said they've been offered, given, or sold drugs or alcohol at school. So what the kids planned to do, we had a community data day planned infamous date, which was March 2020. So that all did not happen. Last year, we couldn't meet in person with the larger group of kids. We decided that definitely one of these concerns popped out at the kids as being the most important, and that was the one about feeling hopeless or depressed, and that was all pre-COVID and up to 38%. And actually in the 2017 data, they teased out the groups of kids so you could see by gender and grade, and it was really a lot of disparity between males and females reporting on this, and the younger female girls. So they were looking at targeting some of these 9th and 10th grade girls. So what they decided to do is to adopt a project that we had read about, that another school, Chelsea High School, not Chelsea High School, but sounds good, had done, which was called Why You Matter. And we started rolling that out a little bit last year, did a bit with it, having kids write down reasons they matter and have photographs of sort of a portraiture, reflection, writing idea. And English teachers agreed to do some more work with this fall. So that's where we are right now. But having kids revisit this data and having them do some of the root cause analysis and really talk about next steps and what they think should happen is really important and so exciting, to see kids really engage with that work.
And I would put that as a plug-in to the board. As you're thinking about what should these goals be, I think student voice is incredible. If the students can share with you what they're concerned about, I wonder how that can inform the board's decisions there. And I want to highlight something Dave did say. We get this data every 2 years. It's really hard to see how we're making progress when we try something and then 2 years go by. And so what we've talked about is what we identify as the important questions. We can give those annually, if not twice a year or 3 times a year. If it's 4 questions, gosh, that's really easy to survey our students at 4 questions. Quick check-in, let's see how you're doing. A few months later, let's check in and see how you're doing again. And wouldn't it be wonderful if we had some student voice in selecting those?
Great. So the next goal is goal number 3, and that is the board goal related to equity. So as you can see, the board has gotten very close to reaching these goals, and I want to give a little bit of detail about how the board's reaching these goals affects our daily life here at school. So the board is reviewing existing policies as they pertain to educational equity. I understand that, in the national and local dialogue, there's discussion around what equity means and what it means to schools. For me, it's really meaningful to have the board's definition of educational equity directly in the policy. I won't read that to you because most of you know it, but that is something that I use daily in my work to advocate for kids who need it. The board got input and guidance on creating an educational equity policy and has adopted it. So again, I want to talk about how this affects our daily lives. So one of the pieces of the definition is about really giving every single student what they need, even if it's different from what another student might need. And so I wanted to give an example. So one example of a historically marginalized group is one super close to my heart, which would be foster or foster-adopt students. So let's think about the experience of a foster student, because we do have many in our system, when they come into one of our classrooms. So foster children, I'm sure you will all agree, are just as brilliant, wonderful, and in need of love as every other student that we have. They might have some other needs. One important piece of belonging and community is feeling seen and represented. So one thing we might do for a foster student in one of our classes is make sure that in the library that we have in the class, that there are books with other examples of different families that aren't just a nuclear biological family. We might even make sure that there's a book developmentally appropriate for whatever grade level they are that has experiences of adoptive or foster students in there. Those books might involve some of the barriers or obstacles or difficulties. And again, at a developmental level, that population of students may have experienced. That doesn't mean that student has definitely experienced that or not, but it means that we're making that a part of that classroom so that student feels that their experience is valued as much as any student from a traditional biological family that's in that room. This also benefits those traditional students as well. So I can speak having a blended family myself with some biological children and some adopted. It makes my biological kids so much more empathetic, strong, thoughtful, to know that there's other experiences besides their own. And as they go through their public school experience, they're experiencing that many different children have different stories than theirs. And learning about those things just makes them better humans. We might have a foster kid that needs extra academic support because they missed 6 months of instruction because of family trauma. They might need counseling because they've experienced a disruption in their relationships. Giving that child those things helps that kiddo. It helps our entire system. It helps economically make sure that that child has everything they need to succeed all the way through their adulthood. It doesn't hurt the other kids who don't necessarily need those things because it helps the whole classroom and most importantly that kid. So if you think about that lens, the goal of our equity policy is to give that experience to any student from a historically marginalized group. That's it. They need to be welcomed, seen, loved, represented, and we need to spend time giving them what they need. At the most basic level, the policy that you have created and that I work off daily says we're going to give every single kid the amount of accuracy that we would give to our own kids as board members and administrators, no more, no less. And that is what I'm able to work off. I also want to mention the board's transgendered and gender nonconforming policy has been really important for me to have this year. There have been at least 5 situations so far this school year that I have had to use the board's policy to make sure that a student was given what they need. I do want to point out that the board's equity policy and transgender and nonconforming student policies are based off federal law and are based off a variety of state laws. Things like No Child Left Behind, things like our anti-discrimination laws, all of those things directly inform our requirement as a public school to make sure that we're looking at data to see which groups of students are falling behind and then putting interventions to make sure that they go ahead. And I want to, again, just my main point is thank you for this because the board's policy work helps me support this.
Just a quick follow-up to what Jody shared there. The work that the board has done, the administration has done with the board on equity, we need to figure out what's next. You've accomplished your goals, or they're all nearly accomplished, so what does that next phase look like? We have an obligation both legally and ethically to do that work. We just need to figure out what the next appropriate step is. The fourth goal, and we're going to go more quickly from here, so rest easy. This is the community-based goal, and this is really one that lands in the hands of the board in a lot of ways. We did adopt a community engagement plan that came out of our community engagement committee. That is completed. The next biggest task comes down to the concept of a survey. You use the word survey a lot. We had some public comment expressed, like we should survey about this or we should survey about that, and you started some conversations as a board about, well, what should we survey the public on? We believe that that is definitely a part of your next steps with goal setting or strategic planning, whatever that may be. What is it that you would want to ask and how would you want to go about that? So reaching out and getting that feedback is an important part of our board goals. Next, in terms of human resources, HR goals, some interesting data to just share with you. The first slide is about employee retention. So you can see total employees. That number is pretty static. You can see how resignations have changed across the years. The remarkable consistency with retirements, terminations, and overall retention rate. You can see we're shooting for a retention rate above 95, so we're not there by any means. That is a remarkably lofty goal to get to 95. The one interesting piece I would share, at least a third of the increases in resignations and terminations this past school year were directly COVID-related situations. Those of you who were board members at different points in the last school year will recall some of those conversations that I had with you about those dynamics. Another part of our goal on HR is related to newly hired teachers specifically, and our retention of newly hired teachers for at least 4 years on average. So if you look at our cohort data, kind of just some interesting things emerged there. I think it's cool to see that we did reach that 80% goal for these two cohorts. I'm sorry, we've reached it for this one. This one's on track. You can see that with these two more recent cohorts, we're already underneath it, but we're at 75%, which is still a pretty solid place to be. And that's something we just continue to track and continue to keep an eye on every day. Finally, continuing to utilize our evaluation system to support our teachers and new teachers. And then the next is teacher daily attendance rate. Again, teacher specifically. We showed you student data earlier. Again, remarkably consistent in terms of teacher attendance data. But I also want to suggest this to you. We started this as a goal after the 18-19 school year. You can see once we started paying closer attention to this, you can see what happened. That means something. When you have a goal and you focus on it, you usually accomplish it. I also want to highlight 2021, a school year where everybody was told over and over, stay home when you're sick, don't come in when you're not feeling well, let's keep COVID out, and we kept COVID out for the most part. We still had really strong attendance data for teachers in all of our buildings. So that's something we're proud of. We want to keep plugging along with that. A couple other details that are already accomplished in the wellness realm. Comprehensive employee wellness policy. The board has adopted that, and we have been negotiating our master agreements with the union with an eye toward wellness, putting incentives in place that will pay off well to the benefit of our employees. Final slide for you, final one. This is the Gary Stan realm. Finance and facilities. Bottom line, run a tight ship financially, run a tight ship in terms of building operations. We're pleased to tell you that all these goals are on track and part of bigger picture work that we're doing. I believe that our board does a nice job of working with Stan and the finance folks and working with Gary operationally and just making sure that we're taking care of the community assets and resources that have been made available to us. So we're grateful for that progress and that work. Ladies and gentlemen, that's what we've got for you tonight. We're grateful for you sitting through this. I'm grateful for Jody, who probably left.
Oh, yeah.
Deborah, Brian, Coral, they put a lot of time in on this. This is a lot, but this is information that we've needed to get in front of you, and we're glad to have the opportunity and looking forward to the next stage of talking about what comes next. What can that retreat look like, strategic planning, etc. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. All very much. I think that was really important for us.
Thank you for sending that.
A big picture of.
Yeah, no, that worked out good.
Me too. You get a big picture of what's going on in the district and so much work is going into it from all corners. So thank you. So now. I'm trying to figure out where we've done our COVID dynamics update. So now we're on number 9, future board meeting considerations.
Can I suggest we table that for another meeting?
I'm fine with that. Or does everybody give that? Do we just take that as an action, or do we need a motion to table?
Go ahead and make a motion.
Okay.
I'll make a motion.
Seconded by Sam Green. All in favor?
Aye.
Great. Okay, so we're tabling number 9. Number 10 is the board retreat agenda, and the retreat is currently scheduled. I did? Oh.
Literacy business.
Oh, whoops, I must be working off the wrong thing. Yeah, literacy, let's go to that. I don't have that.
It was
So I had
an
that
update
as
sent out
9.
today, the new agenda was sent out.
Yeah, it's not. Oh,
That's what I'm on.
that's what I'm using.
Number 9 is a literacy bid request, discussion / action.
All right, fine. Carry on. Literacy bid request.
Go ahead.
And I'll share this. Jody had prepped this. This is more of the same in a sense where we had purchased some literacy kits for certain grade levels. And all the elementary schools purchase certain grade levels, and then there's some federal ESSER funding that they've used different ways to, tutoring or other things. Shrewsbury has chosen to use that to get some more sets to fill in some grades that we didn't purchase. So that's why this is coming again. So the three quotes from Heinemann, $20,452.25. Rigby's, $25,783.00. Scholastic, $24,825.93. So the recommendation is go with Heinemann because it is better pricing and it does align with the resources we already have. And I would ask that the board make a motion to approve the purchase of these curriculum materials.
All right, second? Liz seconded that one. Any discussion? All right, all in favor? Aye. Any against? No. Any abstaining? All right, that passes.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, now I'm working off the same agenda that everyone is. And we are moving on to future board meeting considerations, and I'm not quite sure where.
Yeah, so BJ.
Oh, this is about our potential for hybrid or.
Yeah.
Okay, BJ, do you have that?
You want to table that or something?
Oh, that's what we did. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm out of order then. I apologize.
No, it's.
Moving right along. 2, committee business. No, board retreat agenda.
There you go.
Which is, my understanding is that's coming up on the morning of September 25th. We have not canceled or changed that yet. Wonderful. Okay, it's still in play. Here's my daughter's what's happening. So, do we want to collect to get, build that agenda now, or do we have an agenda set? I'm sorry,
You had an agenda that was planned for the last one that was sent out. I would suggest do the same thing.
we use that same agenda that we had before. Does it?
However, that one had the presentation on it, so I think that's just debriefing and reflecting on the presentation.
Actually, there was actually 2 things on the agenda, because the other one was strategic
plan proposal.
Yes.
Which all fits together,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll keep the debriefing and reflection on goals and strategic planning. Okay, great. Does that require an action, or shall we just?
No, that's
That's just the agenda, just the building. Okay. Okay, great. And moving on again to community business, personnel.
Hi there. We actually met tonight, and we have one position for Stacy Brock, 1.0 full-time equivalency as a custodian. At this point, no specific building, but I would make a motion that we offer Stacy a contract.
Second.
Okay.
Sam, BJ.
Questions? All those in favor? Opposed? Abstained? Okay, we did talk about superintendent evaluation. We will continue to talk about that. Our next meeting is October 6th at 6.
All right, thank you, Len. Policy.
We had a great policy meeting. We had some community members there. We talked about the discipline policy, which is on our rotation. We're trying to just reverse the order so we can spend 10 minutes on the rotation ones. I handed out some examples that I found for the number communication policy to review. So hopefully we'll have more on that at our next meeting, which is usually the second Tuesday of the month at 5:30. Wherever that lands.
It'll be October 12th. There you go. All right. Thank you, BJ. Buildings and grounds.
Nothing to really talk too much about. We're pretty much also into what is going on, away from the buses. The next meeting will be October 4th at 6 o'clock.
Excellent. Thank you, Doug. So community engagement, I can speak to that. We met yesterday, we talked about using a number of things. We had really helpful public comments. Talked about using social media more to share information with our community, about encouraging board members to attend school events while we're having them, including sporting events and performances. And we also talked a little bit more about potential for connecting with students and encouraging their attendance at board meetings if they're interested, or ways to be able to have board members let them know how the school government. The next community conversation, we reviewed the most recent community conversation where apparently there was a lively discussion about masking. And the next community conversation is going to be this coming Monday, September 20th at 6:30 p.m. And the board members attending will be myself, Andrea, is that still work for you, Andrea? And Sam Green. And I do have backup.
Monday at 6:30?
Yep. And it will be virtual. We will not be in person.
Then it'll work.
Okay, great. And that is exactly why we're choosing to have this one be virtual, because that does make it more accessible right now on a Monday evening. But we also talked about having our October conversations be in person and outdoor, possibly on a Saturday morning. So we'll keep you updated about that. It will come after the next board meeting, so it'll be after the next week. We'll let you know how that goes. So just to repeat, the conversations, an opportunity to talk to board members informally with more kind of easy back and forth than you would have in a board meeting or even in a committee meeting, because the committee meetings do have a fixed agenda, which is about supporting the board to engage more effectively with our community. So the next community engagement meeting will be October 12th at 6:30 p.m. Just following policy, we could do a double. Next, finance, please.
All right, good evening, everyone. We have the following pay orders and payroll for approval. For pay orders from the general fund, I have a pay order in the amount of $269,221.13. Also from the general fund, a pay order in the amount of $79,107.22. From After School Program, a pay order in the amount of $1,038.25. And lastly, from the Lunch Program, a pay order in the amount of $2,234.90 for a grand total of $351,601.08. And for payroll, we have payroll dated September 10th in the amount of $564,225.97. And I move that we accept and approve the payroll and these pay orders as presented.
Second. Third.
All in favor? Aye. Any against? No. All right.
All right.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I'll just say that our next finance committee meeting is Monday the 27th here at 5 p.m.
And Doug, when is the point when you say something about
Yes, we're going to not really much anything to worry about. There was a question they had. The payment went out to the members from during the Tinnitus group we did. Gary told me that it's not really for that point. It's more that amount instead of $72,000. We really quoted out at 84, 86. So what happened is that the company was in need of some of the spare things that were left over. There was a slate roof that was going up, and slate's very hard to find to do in houses repairs. And there was a percentage of that's going to come back to us. They will have a final amount after everything's inspected and everything's okay. And we'll be doing that sometime in the near future. Other than that, I've been just fine.
Great, thank you. All right, next up is the added agenda item about the ad hoc committee that we were talking about.
Yeah, we actually had several people say they wanted to do on the committee at the last meeting, and then we just sort of dropped the discussion and went on. So, I don't know if we moved at that other meeting, that committee, did we pick a motion?
So you have a committee, so maybe you could go and then come back and like.
Well, we can't,
Do you need something from us? Do you need a charge from the board?
Can't we just make a motion to have an ad hoc committee?
Right.
But that hasn't happened yet. That's
No,
not happening. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So who's on this committee? I'm sorry, I wasn't.
It hasn't been actually formed yet. There were some members that expressed interest in being on it, but it was never actually formed.
So I'll make a motion that we form a committee to look at student attendance.
Not attendance,
Retention.
retention.
Okay.
Who's gonna chair the meeting? Who's chairing the meeting? We
Pick
have
the
to-
committee, then use the chair.
Yeah, normally you'd form your committee and then when you first.
Oh, okay. Because I know I expressed.
What else, Bruce? We're talking about?
The numbers who should be in the district, that have left the district, and reasons for leaving the district.
Okay. So that's my motion.
The motion is to create an ad hoc committee. Is there a time limit that we should give to this?
No, we didn't on the other one.
Okay. So your motion, that's your motion. Do we have a second for that? Matt, do we have any further discussion about maybe what the character is? Who is planning to be on it? All in favor for us doing this ad hoc committee? Oh, yeah. The numbers of
Members who will be on the committee?
we have Andrea, Len, Bruce, and Doug, no? No. Andrea, Len. Matt, no?
And then the membership could change, obviously, as we want to do.
Can I be marked down as abstain in that vote?
And, all right, moving on, transact other legal business. Exactly.
George not with us?
It's 10:24.
No, that's what we got. Moving on, number 13, agenda building. We'll definitely want to hear back, we'd like to hear back from that new committee. Anything before, we have the board retreat and
We tabled some.
we have the tabled,
Future board meeting.
exactly, future board meeting considerations will be on the next agenda. Anything else burning that's coming up this time of year?
We want to have a discussion about future board meeting, not just considerations, but locations. I know BBS continuing to bring up the concept of,
Yeah.
So
Yes.
we'll work that in.
Let's put that on there too.
We talked at one point about looking at the bylaws. If you remember when we had the election and the difference between what the Clarendon Select Board thought and what was in our bylaws or vice versa. Anyway, those bylaws were created when the district merged, if I'm right, David. And so some things have changed. I just think at some point, you need to take a look at those, whether it's on the next board meeting or not. Something to keep in the back of my mind.
I think that is, on the first day of the next election.
Could we go back to
Business?
get a chance?
Andrea, go ahead.
Can we talk about the speed limit one?
Oh, yeah.
That's why I was going to just.
That's what I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, totally good.
So does that mean we table your other business, or should we, we'll come back to it briefly?
Yeah, let's go back to this one.
Okay, is there anything else?
I want to give a little bit pressure on Tyler to get the student representative in here, so maybe welcome the new student representative.
Yes, welcome.
Might be a little lofty, but we'll give it a shot.
I think Tyler ran.
If available.
Yeah.
Student representatives.
Yes, I don't know if we want to do it.
Okay. Is there anything else that anyone has right now? Bearing in mind that this is not our only chance to build the agenda for the next meeting. This is just our most public chance, and that's important. Okay. Thank you. And now we're going to quick backtrack to a little bit of legal business.
Yeah, if you don't mind, I apologize. Thanks for bringing it up, Andrea. I shared with you communication from the Clarendon Town Office Select Board inquiring about their desire to put a speed limit zone on front of school. Had a side conversation with Mike Klopchen directly. You know, they're even contemplating speed limit adjustments to the whole of Middle Road, not just near the school. Mike was really curious on what the board's feedback was, and I said I'm not sure if they'll get it tonight or not. I get the impression they're not seeking from you, like the board took action and said they want this. I just told them that I would gladly get some consensus and get a feel for how you feel about the topic and just report back to them. So again, for clarity, they inquired about how we felt about a 25 mile per hour zone on the school boundaries, if you will. I met with Joe Hoffman, with Tyler and Kaylin, and also with Gary, because operationally we just talked through that. How do you guys all feel? We agree it makes absolute sense. And I'd be happy to report back to the select board however you guys feel.
They're on their own kind of road there.
They're on
Yeah,
their-
they're on Lake Creek, that road.
Yeah, they're off the main drag.
Okay, so that doesn't matter.
I think they're better off doing a straight 25 than during certain hours, and just, I think they're better off doing a straight 25 in front of the school.
That's what they used to have it during school hours on the road in town.
Yeah, and then they took it
Now
out.
it's
and
just
all the time.
25.
Just straight 25.
Yeah.
I think rather than having a flashing light at times, I think you're better off just straight 25 from the school all the time.
You guys are setting me up.
I agree, and especially seeing how
Sorry,
cross-country
You know how
runners
many times I
feel
go
that-
up and down the middle road?
Yeah.
Sorry about
On that
that.
note, I think when this change does, I think we should do some promotion to the students. I don't think promotion is the right word, but definitely some
Education.
Yeah, no question.
communication to the students more than just a simple email of, hey, this is a change.
And these are
Here's
potential
how you fill out a
consequences.
ticket.
Just as a matter of consensus, does everybody kind of agree that a speed limit zone, at least in the school area, makes sense?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay, I
Thank you
will
for-
pass it on, thank you.
Thank you for bringing that to us. And with that, do we require an executive session? Do we need a motion to adjourn, or can we adjourn by consensus that we're all
We
very
can do
fine?
that. So
It's been rich and productive evening. Thank you all very much.
Maria, thank you